And first thing up on our agenda is a presentation, which is the final report from the Task Force on Voting. Welcome. Sure. And if you want to raise that up, there's a switch there on the front left.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Tim Onderegg. I'm the chairman of the Tacoma Voting Rights Task Force. We have a few other members here as well tonight. Not everyone can make it, but they want to show support. So I just want to start by saying thanks to the council for commissioning the task force in the first place. And it's been a rewarding experience, and it definitely reflects the priorities of Tacoma Park and making sure everyone has access to voting here. So I just want to say thank you for that. I figured I'd review the recommendations briefly and then give you all a chance for questions if you have any, if that works. So we put our recommendations grouped into 5 major categories. The first one is general improvements to increase awareness of elections throughout the city. The second one is to increase voter registration for Tacoma Park residents, especially that 16 to 18-year-old demographic that was recently enfranchised here.
Wait, I'm sorry. Could we just?
Yeah.
Do we have a copy of the?
Oh, did.
There should be an orange sheet.
No.
Nope.
Nothing.
No. Are there orange sheets over there? Well, I'll just go find them. What? I can go. It's fine. I'll get them.
Okay.
You just
Thanks, Jesse. All right, so we'll have them soon.
So just go ahead and continue.
Yeah, I'll just try to go through it a bit, and then y'all can review it later.
Pretend we know what you're talking about.
So the second group of recommendations was increasing voter registration. The third was increasing participation for tenants. The fourth was trying to encourage more people to run for office. Particularly, we focused on that because the last election we made a lot of changes, but there weren't competitive elections, so turnout was not as high as it could have been as a result. The fifth was to expand access to voting itself. And then a sixth section is focused on recommendations for the county and state level, since we were asked to make those recommendations in addition to recommendations for the city. So I'm just going to go through some highlights from each of the categories rather than going into depth. The first category is mostly about communications, so we're encouraging things like increasing signage as much as possible throughout Tacoma Park when an election is upcoming, so people know where and when to vote. Leveraging social networks more fully to place like targeted Facebook ads, since you can target ads to a particular zip code, so you can place ads that residents of Tacoma Park would see about the election on Facebook and other social networks. Creating an event on Facebook that people can RSVP to, so you could create an event for the election, people could RSVP to it. That would help drive promotion because as their friends take that action, others would see it as well. Make sure that we're coordinating with the Voice and the Gazette on putting out as much information as possible around the election. Encouraging the discussion of elections in schools. So research has shown that when young people discuss elections in schools, they are much more likely to get involved in voting, and their household overall is more likely to get involved as they talk about the election at home as well as a result. And recruiting student service learning volunteers. So the public school system in Montgomery County lets students do public service up to 75 hours, volunteer hours before graduation. So we could take advantage of that by encouraging them to do voter registration activities, participate in outreach by putting up posters, engaging online through kind of managing or helping out with the social media outreach. There's a number of ways that students could participate in increasing publicity about the election. And widely publish the election date, just making it a policy to ensure that all official communications within 1 month of the election have information about the election on it. So anything that the city sends out to residents would have that information on there. So it's just as widely saturated as possible. And the last point in that category is to look into synchronizing the election with the state and federal elections, which I know there's a lot of logistical hurdles to make that happen, but it would definitely increase awareness across the board and participation in our own elections if it was synced up with the state and federal elections that happen here. Then the second category around increasing voter registration for Tacoma Park residents. One is, again, educate high school age voters. So that involves reaching out to teachers in particular to make sure that that students have the information about how to register and about when the election is happening. implement online voter registration for Tacoma Park specific voters. So right now there is online registration if you can vote in the state and federal elections, but there's no way to register online if you are under 18 or a non-citizen, for example. So at least setting up some preliminary way for people to fill out a form online to indicate that they want to register if they're not under that category that the state covers. Also look into implementing automatic voter registration. This is one thing that would probably be easier again at the state and county level, but if the city could look into some way of obtaining a list of people who are residents in Tacoma Park and proactively sending them out voter registration forms to their house, that would be another way of communicating about the election, and it would also encourage more people to register in advance so they'd end up on the voter rolls earlier than when they would if they showed up for same-day registration. And let's see. That is the main points under increasing registration. The third one is one point around increasing.
Can I pose a question
sorry.
to you?
Yes.
I'm just curious. Did you
Yeah.
did you assess the disparity in registrations between wards 1, 2, and 3 collectively, and wards 4, 5, and 6? That the rate of registration is much higher in those first 3 wards than in the other 3.
Yeah, it is much higher. Again, so a lot of these things would help reach out to those folks. Maybe they, if you're sending registration forms to their houses, then it becomes much easier for them to register and become aware. We didn't necessarily come up with like a kind of reason why that is and how to address it per se, but we more looked into ways to generally make it easier to register and to reach out to folks as broadly as possible, so that way everyone has as many opportunities as they could. Was that? Yeah, yeah, Ward 4, 5, and 6 do have more tenants versus owners as well, so that's one reason that we highlighted. And our recommendations before, we talked about trying to encourage more people in buildings to vote. So we recommend directly targeting apartment buildings to encourage voting. So we have a contact list of all the information for the manager or tenant association for each apartment, and make sure that they distribute registration materials. Ideally, encourage them to hold candidate forms in their own building, and generally to do as much as possible to educate the people who live there about the election. Yeah, and I think having an online form where folks could register as well would help with people in other wards as well to increase their registration. Then the fourth category was how to get people to run for office. So one is just, again, to sort of dispel myths about needing a lot of experience and knowledge to run, that anyone can run if they're interested and motivated. Try to remind community members that they can run for office at every opportunity and promote it through communications channels as much as possible. Provide some basic information on what it takes to run for office. The organization I work for actually has a website called thecandidateproject.org that has a bunch of online trainings for how to run for office. We did a program like that in the past. There's a bunch of other resources out there that can walk people through the process of running for office and make it easier. And the third point was to look into trying to implement some basic form of public campaign funding, which would help, again, encourage people to run and also take some of the burden of raising money off of folks. So that could be a simple, thing where you match donations that are under a certain amount. So if a campaign collects a $50 donation, the city has a fund that will supplement that and match it up to a limited amount based on whatever budget we could set aside for that kind of thing. And then the fifth category was expand access to voting. One major point here was moving up the nominating caucuses to 8 weeks before the election instead of 4 weeks to give people, once they've actually been nominated, more time to actually run and reach out to voters. That would also allow Tacoma Park residents who are abroad to receive their ballot earlier and return it earlier. It'd make it easier for them to participate, and generally just make it easier for folks to run for office. Establish a standard for early voting. I think right now there's no set guidelines for what the early voting time period should be. So we suggest making it a minimum of 1 week of early voting, ideally more than that. A lot of studies have shown that the more early voting there is, the easier it is for people to vote around their schedules, and the more people participate. Another was to expand access to polling locations. This might help, again, with the disparity in different wards. Right now, you can only vote here during city elections. If we open up another location that was closer to where other folks live, it might make it easier for them to vote on election day or the early voting period. Permanent absentee voting is another idea where people can sign up for the absentee voting list. And what that means is they automatically get mailed their absentee ballot every election instead of having to request one every single time. So this could help for older folks or less mobile folks who always need to vote absentee, so that way they automatically get sent that ballot every time. Another one we had is just continue to provide multilingual ballots. The national standard is you must have a ballot for language based on the Voting Rights Act if more than 5% of the population speaks a given language. We suggest kind of using 2% as a guideline to make it even easier for folks to vote if they speak a different language. And the last one under this category was making it easier for issues to come up for a vote. So that would involve reducing the ballot legislative initiative petition requirement to 10% instead of 20%. Right now, it's very difficult to get things on the ballot since it has such a high standard. If there was more things for people to vote on, then they'd be more likely to participate, even if the city council elections are less competitive during that particular cycle. So those are all the recommendations for the city itself. We have a bunch of recommendations for other jurisdictions that probably mirror a lot of what the Montgomery County Council or the county task force is recommending. But for the county and state, preliminarily, a lot of the things we recommend is that they adopt some of the policies that we have in Tacoma Park. So that is, expanding rights, voting rights for immigrants, for residents with felony convictions, and 16 to 17-year-olds across the state, rather than just in this city. We'd encourage the county to adopt the recommendations from the Presidential Commission on Election Administration. So that includes just getting more people to become poll workers, creating advisory groups for voters with disabilities and limited English proficiency, and testing voting materials before Election Day to see what is most effective in terms of communicating with the populace. Other ideas along those lines include establishing a youth seat on the council, and this could actually apply for the city and the county, is to have a under 18-year-old be able to be on the council and at least participate and represent youth issues. Also, potentially holding mock elections to give folks who are not yet eligible to vote an opportunity to learn how the process works and get used to the process. This also includes first-time voter seminars, which would be held in schools to educate students about how to vote and what the process is. High school registration competitions, where we try to encourage students at schools to form teams and kind of compete to get folks registered. Allowing same-day voter registration at the county and state level is something that would go a long way to make it easier to vote. Improved electronic voter registration, which involves syncing up the online voter registration system with the MVA to make sure that information can flow back and forth easily. Yes, and that's the majority of the county recommendations. And the state recommendations are along the same lines generally, so same-day voter registration, immigrant youth, and residents with felony convictions voting. We also discussed the idea of lowering the age to run for office at the state level down to anyone basically who is eligible to vote would also be eligible to hold office for the governor, lieutenant governor, state senate, House of Delegates, circuit court judge elections. Another major one is purchasing voting machines with ranked choice voting capabilities. The recommendation to move our election to coincide with the state and federal elections would definitely depend on those voting machines being capable of implementing the way that we vote in Tacoma Park as well. So it'd have to support ranked choice voting, and it would have to accommodate the fact that some people can vote in Tacoma Park but can't vote in the city or in the state and county elections. Another one there is to consider passing a statewide Voting Rights Act to supplement and extend protections offered under the Federal Voting Rights Act. Again, automatic voter registration, improved online voter registration, and we had one additional recommendation for the state to look into creating a mobile voting application, similar to the way DC did, which would just be a mobile phone for Android or Apple, an app that allows people to look up, to register to vote, request absentee ballots, get information about where to vote, the polling location, who's going to be on their ballot, as another way of communicating with voters about the relevant information for voting. And we had a few federal recommendations. One is a constitutional amendment enshrining the right to vote, which doesn't currently exist. Another was the Voting Rights Amendment Act, which would help restore some of the protections that the Voting Rights Act offered before the court case. And the Line Act, which is it requires states to provide a minimum number of voting systems, poll workers, and other election resources that would make it easier for folks to vote. And it would guarantee some consistency among polling stations. So, very quickly, that was our summary of all of our recommendations. Obviously, you can read them yourself, but if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thanks. We have another report If there's something that we really got to check, I would imagine it would be easier once we've read it and we're just now getting the copies. So
Sure.
we may have some additional questions. We may want to have you come back.
Sure.
Or we may just communicate directly.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, may I
Yes.
ask one question?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My question is, there's the big disparity between residents live in apartment buildings and residents that live in single-family homes and their practice of voting. Did you guys think about surveying residents that live in apartments and find out actually why they're not voting?
We thought about that. We did actually conduct a poll during the election at the polling location, where we asked people various questions, but obviously that only got people who voted. So we didn't necessarily have the resources to kind of conduct a survey of the folks who weren't voting and how to find them. But definitely that's a good idea, and I think it would go a long way to identifying what some of the barriers are. So, yeah,
Okay, thank you.
fully support that.
Thanks very much.
Cool.
And who were the other members of the committee who were here?
Right here, Jeffrey and Alex. And yeah, and then Camille, Abby, Tricia, Oliver. Those are the other members as well. So we had 7 members on our committee.
Okay. Councilmember Schultz, you had something?
Yeah, just, did you give any thought to changing we're talking just about city elections.
Uh-huh.
The area, just changing the date, the voting date, instead of being a work day to a Sunday, for example, when.
Yeah, I mean, that could probably be helpful. I think the early voting does get somewhere to that, so you're allowed to, vote the week before, and extending early voting even further, I think would help if there's 2 weekends of early voting before the election, then that give people plenty of opportunity to vote. The main recommendation we had around moving the date was just to sync it up with the state and federal elections, so that way, everyone votes all at once. But it could help as well to just make sure that the official day.
My other thought is that because we have voting for people who are age 16 and 17,
Mm-hmm.
which is not done in the county at large.
Yes.
I don't know how we could sync it up until Montgomery County
Yeah.
changes its voting age to be the same as ours, which they may not or may do, who knows. But otherwise, you'd have to have 2 who have to vote here, and then they'd have to vote here to go into 2 different.
Yeah.
It just seems like it would be really difficult to do
Yeah, it would
that.
definitely be a logistical challenge. I think we'd encourage them to lower their voting age as well.
Oh, sure.
If not, then
Right.
it would require them to make concessions to having voting machines that can handle a variety of different ballots and to
Right.
having multiple different lists.
Yeah.
So we'd,
Yeah.
the city might have to work with them to determine, can we, help provide the staffing necessary to mark our own list
Right.
in addition to the county and state list as well.
Yeah,
But it
do
would be
think-
easy.
I think we need to have some time to go look at all this stuff and
Sure.
think about it.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.
And did
Absolutely.
the clerk have a comment?
I only wanted to say thanks, Tim. The Board of Elections was anxiously awaiting this report as well, and I'm sure you want to have, I hope that you do want to have the task force come back, as well as the Board of Elections, after everybody's had a chance to absorb the report. So if not this fall, then maybe very early in the new year.
I think
We'd be happy to do so.
I think it'll be early in the new year.
Yes.
I know what the agendas look like for the rest of the year.
Well, that works fine. Yeah, we're happy to come back anytime you need us.
Good,
So,
thanks.
yep. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And now we'll have a report from the Montgomery County Voting Rights Task Force, which was chaired by Councilmember Mayo.
I'm going to dress from down here. I don't ever get to do that.
Yeah, you'll have a hard time getting back up here.
Thank you. Again, my name is Tim Mail. You all know me. I'm also the chair of the task force that the Montgomery County Council established to look into a whole suite of issues around voting. The task force is still ongoing. Our term ends essentially in March. The county council asked us to look at not just the primary and not just recommendations in the abstract, but also to pay attention to the implementation of this coming general election in November 4th. So, sorry, how do I advance the slide?
Rookie.
Totally,
The keyboard is down there.
Hey, look at that. There we go. It's a I guess I would say, a nonpartisan task force in that there are Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Greens, maybe a person who's libertarian on the task force. We met for 80 hours, exchanged about 1,000 emails, and came up with 59 recommendations, 41 of which were either unanimous or we had 90% task force support. So that's what took 80 hours. And I will just, you all can read the report online. The members of the community can read the report online. It's quite a lengthy document that gives, in most cases, both a pro and a con. If there was a dissenting member or someone just wanted to express a minority view that was different than whatever the majority were expressing, there's room for both of those. And then about a page on each one, deliberation of why this recommendation, what problem is it addressing. So 3 categories, not dissimilar from the Tacoma Park Task Force. We looked at recommendations that would make it easier for people to register, changes in the structure and function of government that would provide some form of better representation, people's views of how they would get better representation, and then how do you deliver more potential voters. So again, these are just examples, but for example, you could create and they do have an online voter registration form. When someone goes through that form, they have to print it, sign it, and send it back in. But a very simple option is to just create a save button where when you click save, the information is saved at the State Board of Elections. And the State Board of Elections can then follow up with those people saying, we got 90% of your registration information. You just need to sign this and send it back to us on this pre-stamped envelope. So essentially, it's just making it easier for people to use a form like that. Another similar idea is that whenever anyone interacts with, and in this case the recommendation is focused on the county government, whenever anyone interacts with county government, they're sitting in an office filling out a form for whatever it might be, food assistance, housing assistance, you name it, that part of that process is, are you registered to vote? Can we make this easier for you? And that's not something that's apparently widely established within county agency practice right now. Forms may be available in offices, but there's a difference between making a form available and affirmatively asking someone about registering to vote. Under better representation, so one example is having more special elections as opposed to appointments. And as you know, there's a ballot question we're looking at in the November ballot with regard to the county executive, if the county executive slot comes open. That would be one example, but there's other places at both the county and state level for special elections versus appointments. Another is that the task force debated the concept of open primaries, letting essentially anyone vote in any particular primary. That is allowed right now. My understanding is that's allowed right now under Maryland law if the party wants to do that. And the Republican Party, either in the state or the county, has considered letting others vote in their primary. The recommendation that the task force settled on was that if the general election would otherwise be uncontested, in other words, if only one party has a contested primary, then the recommendation of the task force was to let all voters participate in that primary, because that would be their only chance to influence the outcome of the race.
Are Maryland parties required to have primaries, or can there be a selection through a different mechanism? Do you know?
I don't know. But certainly I don't know if the Green Party, for example, has a primary.
I thought Mary here.
They do not. So the Green Party does not have a primary, so I guess they could not. They could skip the primary process and use a different method. Another one drawn out here is in terms of ballot initiatives. In other words, like referendums, but an initiative is voter initiated, creating a ballot initiative process and then looking at the signature threshold, 3% of the people who voted in the previous election for governor, or for the last set of elections in Maryland, that would be about 55,000 signatures. And then in terms of delivering more potential voters, you could pre-register. So we looked at the issue of automatic registration or opt-out registration, and settled on the idea of pre-registering people, saying, hey, we have now added you as a pending into our database of registrations. If you want to activate that pending, here's how you do it, as a way to just again, make it really easy for people to get into the system, and almost hard for them to escape the voter registration system. In terms of Tacoma Park, here's a list of things that the task force endorsed in some form that we already do here in some form. So same-day registration, lowering of voting age. Councilmember Schultz, I'd note that I wasn't even in the room when this vote and the debate happened about the lowering the voting age. So it wasn't me. Ranked choice voting, county residents with permanent residency visas should be able to vote in county elections. And then questions around residents who are on parole or probation for a felony, allowing them to vote, which would take state action. Some recommendations that I think directly affect cities one way or another, and I'll start at the top here. Ask the State Board of Elections to study whether municipal voters would be better served with even-year elections. We heard that from the city task force. And then have the county assist any municipality that's asking to sync their elections. So the question of how technically difficult would it be came up, and trying to get the county council to affirmatively indicate that they would help somebody if they wanted to help. That was apparently an issue with Rockville's consideration of this issue, and some feedback at the staff level was apparently discouraging of that sort of cooperation. When military and overseas voters request a ballot, letting them know about municipal elections, letting them know that they can also vote in municipal elections that are coming up in whatever, some time period in the future. Again, that's more of an informational thing. The state of Maryland is buying voting machines. I understand that the selection will occur in December, and whether they will purchase voting machines that could be used in Tacoma Park for our elections or not is an open question. So one of the recommendations was for the task force to recommend to the county that the county, reach out to the state decision makers and get them to say, buy voting machines that can do a variety of things. And finally, we voted against, or we discouraged online voting as an option for the county council. I'll just touch on two issues, one that was part of this and one that is sort of a future issue. These are a set of stats that the mayor and council members can look at later around the question of odd year versus even year elections. I think, to me, the survey from the California Institute of Public Policy is perhaps the most compelling, that you get 36% higher turnout in a presidential year, 20 to 25%, 20 to 26% higher turnout in a non-presidential year from a November even year election than you get in 350 cities examined in California. That it's hard to find something you can do that will generate more voters than a change like that. There are a number of studies that start looking at the issue of the diversity of voters that show up at even year versus odd year elections, and showing perhaps a lower turnout among minorities. Certainly, again, data from California suggests that in particular Latinos are less likely to be represented in cities that have odd year elections. You can read the quotes here. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund quote is from a report about the city of Ferguson and the various follow-up and analyses about Ferguson, which is a city that has a very white city council and not a very white population, or a more diverse population. And then the top reference up here to Augusta, Georgia. Similarly, that's a city with a very close balance in terms of a minority-majority breakdown, and there have been attempts to move their election, which were initially blocked by the Department of Justice. So I think this is an issue we'll hear more about no matter what across the country, and it might be something to try to get the state or the county to be proactive in terms of just trying to understand the issue. And then an issue that I hope we'll address in the future, I think at least I knew a lot about this, what I thought was the success of Maryland in letting people register to vote when they go to get a driver's license. But the data from the Department of Motor Vehicles turns out that they register, and this is just for 16 to 18-year-olds, they register 33,000 drivers, but only 25% of those people are getting registered to vote. So that's an example of something where it's probably the form, the way the question's asked, the amount of work you have to do to fill out a second form when you go in to get your driver's license, and the absence of information that if you're 16 or 17, you can pre-register to vote. It causes them to lose 75% of potential voters that they could be registering very easily. So I'll end there. That's a quick tour of some of the recommendations that were in the report. As I said, the task force will continue to meet. We have another meeting next month, looking at the election and then coming up with a final report. The GO committee, the county council had a meeting last week to talk about this initially with staff, with county staff, county executive staff. I understand from Councilwoman Navarro that they'll probably have another meeting like that, another work session in January or February, and then from there take recommendations back to the full council to move forward on, both recommendations that are county actions and then possibly recommendations that would go back to the state legislature. Thank you.
I'm assuming that the references there to the odd year, even year are essentially the same as the sync-up language.
Correct.
And I'll just note that I've heard some discussions of various issues around syncing up municipal elections with other elections at Maryland Municipal League in particular. And I know that a number of people have raised issues about if the election syncs up, then essentially all of the election rules, the way a municipality runs their elections, there's a much higher likelihood that everything about the elections will fall under state elections law, and that a number of smaller municipalities in particular might have issues with that, just in terms of the requirements for filings and things like that. So that I know that it's not just a question of turnout, it's a question of does it involve kind of the whole enchilada?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's a question of whether there are technical issues, technical obstacles that can be solved, or whether they're really fundamental issues. For example, Councilmember Schultz mentioned our resident non-citizen voting. How would we deal with that? Presumably, we'd need to process something like the absentee ballot process. Our city clerk already counts, different stacks of ballots right now, so we'd have to have some mechanism like that.
Right, and it also gets to technical issues like they talk about whether people would then have to file campaign finance documents with the state and follow the state form, and it just gets more complicated. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
We may ask you back.
It's up to you.
Not for the presentation, no. And what we're ready to do is move on to the preliminary part of the agenda, so that if there's a question you have, you can ask it at public comment. First, just a couple items on upcoming agendas that I want to point out. Next Monday, October 27th, we'll have a presentation at 7 o'clock. I think it's 7, or is it 7:30? 7. I got two different answers over there. We'll have a presentation next week. 7. An update from PEPCO. The Vice President for Maryland, Jerry Pasternak, will be here. The following Monday, November 3rd, we have a meeting that's a fully devoted to discussion of the Tacoma Junction redevelopment proposals. The following Monday, November 10th, we have presentations. We have an update on the sustainability program and an update from the Committee on the Environment. The next day, Tuesday, November 11th, city's offices will be closed for the Veterans Day holiday. Monday, November 17th, we have presentations on the FY14 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report and the Police Pension Plan Actuarial Valuation. And we have a work session discussion of legislative priorities. Following Monday, November 24th, we're currently scheduled to have a dog park update and discussion of Tacoma Junction redevelopment proposals, and a reminder that the city offices will be closed for the Thanksgiving holiday both Thursday and Friday, November 27th and 28th. So that takes us through the end of November, just pointing out a couple things that might be of interest to people. at this point, we will go to public comment on the voting item, and we have a single voting item this evening, which is our special session item, which is a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for mulch storage facility walls. Does anybody have any public comment on that resolution, on that ordinance?
Mulch storage.
Mulch storage. Okay. See, oh, you're getting ready for the next one.
Oh, next one? Okay.
Okay, now, other public comments.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, now,
You started to say all public comments were over.
no, now we've moved to public comments on work session items or anything that's not on the agenda. Just a reminder, we now take public comments on voting items first, so that anybody who wants to comment on anything that we're taking up to vote on as an agenda item, as an ordinance or a resolution, they know that they have the chance to do that at 7:30 or very close to 7:30. We had times in the past where voting items happened very late in the evening, and people who wanted to comment on those voting items had to leave because we were taking them up at 10 o'clock. So,
Diana Cohn, 16 Jefferson Avenue. And I'm here to speak about the work session to discuss the Recognition Commission. And as the council knows, I was part of the group that brought this forward. So I just wanted to make a couple comments. First of all, yes, Historic Tacoma does do some of the honoring work and bringing to the attention of the community the various folks that deserve recognition. And the Tacoma Foundation also honors volunteers every year. But I think that there is a role for the city in this that is a much broader, almost clearinghouse role. That it's important for the city to have a stake in honoring these people, past, present, and future. And so they are the proper entity to be doing this, and that was part of the impetus behind creating the commission, the suggested commission in the first place. And this would provide a way for citizens residents, not citizens, who have things locally that they want to do that aren't necessarily yet in the purview of history or volunteers, and it will provide some structure for them to participate. So all in all, the goal is to expand awareness of history, expand awareness of what the people in the community are doing, and the best way to do that is to have it be a city function. And given that next year is the 125th anniversary, or marks the 125th anniversary of the incorporation of Tacoma Park as a town, 1890, we had 500 citizens, and we incorporated in Maryland.
Citizens and
And
residents.
so it's an appropriate kickoff time for this commission going forward, and it will begin kind of to spread the word through the 125th celebration, and then can pick up and carry forward from there. So that's my comments. Thank you.
thanks.
Hi, Mary Rooker, Larch Avenue, Ward 2. I was also on the task force, the Montgomery County Right to Vote Task Force with Tim. And Seth, my memory is not fresh, but I know there are separate rules in the state of Maryland for principal parties, the two principal parties, and that would include the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party, and then for minor or non-principal parties, which is the Green Party. And I don't believe there's any state financing or taxpayer financing for minor party primaries. So we could hold them, but we would have to finance it ourselves. And we don't have the Wall Street money for that, so, or the taxpayer financing for it. Just a couple of quick comments on the Right to Vote report. Campaign financing is something that we think is very important. However, the rules on them are often written in a way that is actually discouraging and hard for third parties. The number barriers are often too high for us to they're too high of a hurdle for us to meet to get matching funds. So just something to be aware of. Try to make sure that when you approach that, it's a worthy goal, but make sure it's inclusive. As to moving our local city off-year elections to coincide with the larger county, state, and federal elections, I have mixed feelings about it. I can certainly see the advantages. But I'm also aware of at least one big disadvantage for me personally. With only one polling station open with the off-year cycle, it's very easy for candidates and issue advocates to reach voters. You don't need a lot of staff at multiple polling stations. You can just come here. I know when I worked on the instant runoff voting proposal, it sure was a lot easier to reach as many voters as possible. And there were a few. It passed 84%. There were a few who were opposed to it, but at least they were making an educated no, which is what we really want, is educated voters. So despite the advantages of syncing with even-year elections, I think a good case can be made to keep our off-year elections. And I would say this is not necessarily a problem here at the city level, but certainly once you get to the county and on up, the biggest threat to our democracy, and I believe the biggest obstacle to voter participation, is actually our 18th century winner-take-all electoral system. So the council is right, both councils, the city and county council, are right to be concerned. And we would like a 21st century electoral system, or at least a 20th century upgrade. Voters really want a broader range of access to different independent and unaffiliated voters in particular really would like more choices than they're getting. And again, this is not such an issue at the local city, but at the other levels. And finally, as a member of the task force, the county task force, I for myself made an index, which is sadly missing in the report. I had trouble finding the various issues that I worked on this. So I brought extra copies that I can give. I think I only brought 9, but I can email it if you like.
Thank you.
Robert Patton from 705 Westmoreland Avenue. I just had some thoughts about this, the voting. It seems to me like maybe the syncing up of our voting with the even years wouldn't be that difficult. So, I would suggest we think about doing it in such a way that we're not merging our voter rolls with the county, we're not merging our ballot with the county, but we're simply conducting our Tacoma Park election on the same day. It would work a lot better if it was a Saturday, because we would need to muster more volunteers to staff more voting locations, because you would want to have every Montgomery County voting location where somebody could also do the Tacoma Park voting. But it seems like it just could all happen in the same room. The last time I voted for Tacoma Park, we just had a little piece of paper that we folded in half. It's kind of like what you did in school, and put it in the box. So it seems like our process is pretty simple if we keep the core of it the same. It might not be that difficult, and we would get more participation. But the best way to get more volunteers would be if now there's some merits to the having multiple types of election days, but if the core election day was a Saturday or a Sunday when people could volunteer as well as people could vote, then you wouldn't have to have an aging population just to conduct an election in the town. Thanks.
Hello, Jeff Trunzo, 119 Sherman Avenue. I'm here tonight because I wanted to express support for the parking discussion that the council is going to embark upon. I don't have anything specific to offer at this point in time other than in many areas of policy, the city is way on the edge of progressive points of view. And I think parking is one that we've sort of let go on the back burner, and we should really think about issues both macro-wide, how parking affects the entire city, environmental-wide, and particularly with our new commercial developments and some ongoing issues we have already, where we're going to go in the future. I could probably talk, I've talked to many people already, I could talk for a long time about issues with parking that we have on Sherman Avenue. The chief is very supportive. We have a very weak, we have very few tools in enforcement. And I'm happy to speak for myself, but I find it very unsettling to have a car of unknown origin parked in front of my house for many weeks on end before we can legally move it. And I'd really like to see that end. And I guess I said I would say nothing specific, but I will say something specific. I think the time has come that we should really be willing to think about what public good and what city good is being served by having uncontrolled overnight parking. I would be so bold as to say we should know the identity of every car that's parked on the street overnight, whether or not it belongs in the city and what it's doing here. So I'll stop there.
Thanks.
Mayor Williams, council members, Tacoma Park citizens. I wish to address a statute that's already received some attention in City Council, but I feel it needs more advocacy. The statute that makes it illegal to post a sign on a utility pole negatively impacts anyone who's doing a yard sale or missing a pet or promoting youth soccer or any non-commercial use. And some of you know the saga of when my cat went missing years ago. Sorry I inconvenienced you. But particularly for lost pet owners, being able to post a sign on a utility pole is a vital, irreplaceable means of neighborhood communication and truly effective in recovering a lost pet. I know this because not only have I employed it for my own pet, which, by the way, he never came home, but while canvassing on foot for a city council candidate a couple of years back, I noticed a sign on a utility pole for a missing deaf cat. A few weeks later, a post came out on a listserv from a family looking to rehome a deaf cat that had shown up at their door. The owner wasn't on the listserv, but I was. So I put two and two together and reunited that very grateful owner with their cat. Without those signs, I would never have known. Frankly, the surplus of campaign signs that we deal with week after week during election season, to me, is more irritating, but it's somehow tolerated, along with the sign that says there's a book sale at the library, Peter Franchet's campaign, the ones that our election board is talking about putting up to notify people. You know, this is a very selective thing. We aren't enduring these things. You know, we're asked to tolerate that and be understanding of that because that's a democratic process. But when somebody is, you know, doing a yard sale or promoting a youth activity or missing a pet, which if you've never gone through it, it's pretty darn heartbreaking. You know, that's the only way. But we tolerate the political stuff. We do it for weeks and weeks and weeks. During the last election, it was all over Sligo Creek Parkway where I live. And people who are doing campaigns get a lot of support, and they have numerous mechanisms to get the word out. So there's not all of that. This is Tacoma Park, where it's not a cookie-cutter perfect community. We're supposed to be progressive and compassionate and caring. I think we need to revisit this. This code was set up for commercials because we don't want the big car signs and the Viagra signs and the computer signs. But being able to post on a pole is a really helpful way for citizens for a variety of mechanisms, and I think we need to revisit this and change the statute to say commercial, and while we look at it, to have some sort of a moratorium for non-commercial signs. So,
Thanks.
Thank you.
And can you identify yourself for the record?
Oh, I'm Maxine. Y'all know me.
Just wanted to make sure.
Oh,
Maxine, what was your last?
Hillary.
Maxine Hillary.
And I'll have to go back and look at the code, but my recollection is that there is some provision for some kind of neighborhood signs and different signs.
Well,
but we'll take a look.
I called today and they said there wasn't, and I did it because somebody who's going through this right now has asked for my assistance. And I don't want to take up time that belongs to other citizens, but
Okay.
it is a vital way, and I think that we can write the statute to make it a little bit more accessible. I can only imagine if we had to do the Magna Carta online, it wouldn't work. So,
Thanks for the reminder.
thank you.
Good evening. I have some handouts. Robert Anderson, 7120 Woodland Avenue. And what I've given you is the annual report from the co-op. The co-op has asked me to come speak with you tonight about basically what's on page 3, which is our financial report for the last 2 years. Let me first say that fiscal year 2014 is unaudited at this particular point, so those numbers may change a little bit, but they're in the ballpark of what we have at this point. And also, if I have graphics, on this comment section, can I get them put up? Not tonight, but in other cases?
Ahead of time, yes.
Good. Okay. Thank you. I'd like to take a few minutes to go over the highlights of the financial report the general manager and financial manager have put together. They and everyone else at the co-op have worked very hard, and the results are clear in our financial report on page 3. Overall, the co-op is financially secure. They're increasing sales in the Como Park store during fiscal 2014, and this upward trend of sales has continued into this year. We have no long-term debt. And at the end of the last fiscal year, June 30, 2014, we had over $1.7 million in cash in our coffers. I'll discuss some of the comparisons and the impact of closing the Silver Spring store on the 2 years of data that you have. Those years run from July 1 through July 30. Fiscal 2013 numbers include both the Silver Spring and Tacoma Park stores. Fiscal 2014 numbers include sales from 3 months in Silver Spring until it was closed in 2013. September. Junction. These funds, coupled with increasing sales, membership, and profits, show that TPSS is in a strong financial position now and projected into the future. Thank you for letting me go over my time. I appreciate that, folks.
Thanks very much.
Jeffrey Nussbaum, 228 Manor Circle. I've just got some quick points based on some of the questions that you were able to put forward during the presentation. I had some responses and to some of the comments. But first, on the signs, and I really don't know the law. I haven't looked at it, but my understanding was, and I think this would be a good approach, is as long as you took them down, you were required to take them down after a certain period of time, or if it was like for a specific event, they had to be down like that day of that event. So some sort of requirement like that where the person who puts them up is required to take them down has some sort of accountability to it. On the recommendations, definitely the council, from the voting task force, the council should obviously use its own judgment. You all obviously have experience in elections. And on the county recommendation for anyone coming into the county offices, as I just want to say, for a lot of the programs, especially all the ones that Councilmember Mail mentioned, I work for food supplement programs and the Medicaid and all that. We are required for all those programs to interview the people who are applying. And one of the required questions by federal law in the interview is, are you registered to vote? Would you like to be? And if so, here's the registration. You can fill it out here and we'll submit it. So I just wanted to say, I know for a lot of the county programs, certainly not all, that is already going on to a certain extent. And then in response to the issue of having an election on a day other than, say, a Tuesday, the one thing to keep in mind there is that you have to worry about creating confusion in people's minds about when elections are. If people know the elections are the first Tuesday after the second Monday in November, and they can remember that, and it's that every year, there's a certain continuity to it. Whereas if you start making it a Saturday, people, maybe show up to vote on what they think is election day, and there's no election. So obviously signage and other publicity would hopefully deal with that, but that's just one concern. And you're not just confusing them for our elections, because they know the other elections. You might catch somebody who just moved here, from another country and then they vote here, and then they get their citizenship, and then they go to vote in a regular election. Well, they'd probably get that right because they have the citizenship test, but but if we went to, allowing at the county level or state level, allowing people with green cards to vote, then that could be an issue, with them.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Larry Silverman. I live 7308 Birch Avenue, and I also own S&A Beads on Laurel Avenue. I'm really pleased that you're discussing the issue of parking. I think it's a very significant municipal responsibility. Not to say that the government is the only party. You need a lot of private sector participation too. But I think the major flaw in the parking situation at Tacoma Park, which is clearly going to get worse if nothing is done, we can see it coming like a train, is a lack of a plan. There's a failure to evaluate what the parking situation is now in a kind of scientific way, not just street by street, but comprehensively. There's a need for an estimate of what the parking demand will be in the future. There's a need to inventory what is available, to see what is being overused and what is being underutilized, and generally to come up with a plan. And some of that plan may include financing, particularly for structured parking, if that seems necessary. And I think it's the city government, first of all, and I hope you'll get help from the state and the county, that has that responsibility. And if you drop that ball and you don't meet that responsibility, I think everybody in the city is going to be hurt. The environment will be hurt. My business will be hurt, and a lot of residents will be inconvenienced. So I don't mean to suggest that there is a total solution to a problem like this. There probably never will be, but we could do a lot better and we could do a lot worse. And right now we're trending to a lot worse. So I'm really eager to hear what you have to say, and I commend you for taking up this issue, and I hope you continue to take the leadership in this issue, and if you do, you'll have my support and the support of many others, both residences and businesses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Francis Phipps, 7210 Holly Avenue. I'd like to thank the council for taking up this issue, and I'd like to echo the gentleman's remarks. I really think we have an opportunity to do a plan here. We still have time. We're still slightly ahead of the curve. Not much, but slightly. I anticipate that there'll be about 400, somebody knows these numbers better than I, residential units coming online along Carroll at the Metro site and the Busboy, Tacoma Central development within the next certainly 24, 36 months. That is not even looking at the possibility of any development behind CVS and on the district side. And all of this, of course, is happening outside our borders. But our impact will be there. It could be very good for us. We've been working for years to have a vibrant commercial area. And now that we have it, we have to deal with these problems of success. What I'd encourage you to look at is this is the initiation of this discussion, that there be actually a process, that the public is included as you examine all these issues, that circulation is really critical. You can't examine parking without circulation. I will give you one example because I see it every day, and it has to do with how you come into Tacoma Park. East-West Highway gets blocked from about 2:30 to about 4:30. And I've noticed people coming down Piney Branch Road go up to Eastern, take a left, come down Eastern, see if there's a lot of traffic down there. They take a left onto Holly, a right onto Tulip, and go that way. The minute we start getting more development actually up and operating on Carroll with our residential units, that access to Tacoma Park will become much more difficult. So I'm telling you, I see this every day, certainly at from 3:30 on, I see the traffic tending to come down Eastern, go on to the first block of Holly, and then all the way down Tulip to get into either Old Town or Maple or where they want to go. I think it's very important, and I think I'm not familiar enough with what goes on in Westmoreland, but I think that there must be a lot of access there. So a process, include the people in the discussion, include parking and circulation, and have a plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Susan Robb. I live at 203 South Manor Circle, and I, too, wish to comment on the this discussion tonight on parking, commercial parking in residential areas. Our section of Manor Circle is on one side 6 houses, and the other side of the street are 2 houses, and that is pretty much the parking lot for Tacoma Junction. I frequently see Manor Circle to the triangle at 213 Manor Circle parked up. No one's parked on Carroll Avenue. The parking is insane. There is a lot behind the yoga studio. Everyone's parked on Carroll Avenue. So if anybody wants to stop and get a pizza or pick up their dry cleaning, they can't park on Carroll Avenue because all the spaces are taken up without money in the meter for the yoga class, and so they park on Manor Circle. In the last 2 weeks, I've had to park over a block from my house when I came home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Last Friday evening, I was walking the dog after her supper, and we have 2 driveways on the south side of the street. Both of them were blocked. We have 2 driveways, and they were both blocked by commercial parking. In addition to that, Manor Circle, South Manor Circle is right in the middle of the 7300 block of Carroll Avenue. There are 8 businesses on that block, small neighborhood businesses, the dry cleaners, the picture framers, the hair salon, and so on. In addition to that, we have a new business that we welcome, Mad Fitness. They are posting 12 classes a week. We have the yoga studio who has 22 classes a week. We have the School of Music. It was unclear to me when I picked up their brochures this afternoon, but there were 4 group classes, and it looked to me like 3 more that would be group classes in addition to private lessons. That's a lot of people coming into a street that has 7 parking meters on Carroll Avenue, 3 on Lee, around the corner from TJ's.
Grant.
I'm sorry? Grant, yeah, thank you. And 2 on Lee. So you can guess where they're parking. People say, do you have permit parking? Look at your permit parking process and tell me how that fits into the needs of this. I'm really welcoming the city manager's whatever he has to say. I can say that our parking issues start at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it'll be 10 o'clock tonight before the street is cleared. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Jim Douglas. 2112 Maple Avenue. I too want to thank the attitude in the way people think about anything goes in front of driveways, anytime, any place. So I would ask 3 things. Number 1 is let's get a handle on the immediate problems in Manor Circle, problems and close into Old Town. Let's get away from the complaint-based. It shouldn't be up to us to have to call in every time. We have a parking enforcement staff. We have other staff in the city who are responsible for enforcing the law. Let's enforce the laws we have now, first of all. Secondly, I think in the short run, we need to look at some solutions. And I appreciate the work that the business community has been doing in the Old Town area. We had a meeting with some of them, I think this past summer, the city manager and the mayor talked about some of those. I think those are interesting intermediate short-term options, maybe extending permits cycles, maybe adding some meters, doing some other, informing people where some parking might be. But what's really missing, and those who've come before me have said, we really are not strategic about this. We're not addressing what our requirements are. We're not addressing where our opportunities are. We're not addressing how the traffic flows in this city. And I would ask you to deal with all three of those things in the near future. Let's enforce what the current laws and the problems we're having in our closed-in neighborhoods. Let's find some solutions in the short run, and then let's really have a long-term solution. I think this is one of those opportunities where all of the stakeholders, the neighborhoods, the business owners, and the consumers really need to be working together, and I think we can do that. One of the things I don't want to have is starting a sort of us versus them, zero-sum game kind of thing. So I look forward to working with you and the business owners on that. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hello, I'm Keith Chamberlain. I live in 7102 Maple, a neighbor of Jim's. I'd like to I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to state that we live right where all this is going on with the construction at Tacoma Central, and with the other things coming online, like Francis talked about. I don't think we have a lot of time to waste to start doing something. It has to be kind of quick. I know it takes time to do studies, but I've heard things thrown out such as parking meters or extending times for the 2A parking zone. Maybe some streets need to be one-way. Tulip is certainly very small. People talk about their mirrors being ripped off, and if there's more and more traffic, it's definitely going to be more and more traffic. There's no question. Like Francis said, you got something behind CVS possibly coming, businesses becoming more and more popular in downtown Tacoma, the possible EYA by the Metro. We have to address it, and I just wanted to make a point that the quicker the better to serve the residents. My wife said she couldn't get out of our driveway just recently, which I didn't know about until 2 minutes ago. But those types of things are really not acceptable for taxpayers. So I'd like to urge you to really start looking at a plan in a way you can make it good for residents as well as people that visit, because we live by tax dollars and retail sales in the downtown Tacoma area. So there's got to be some balance, but I think first you have to take the residents' thoughts and concerns in hand, and then deal with the other possibilities of other retail things coming along. Possibly the community kitchen at the church is another issue. It's going to have even more traffic possibly if it comes to fruition. So there's lots of things that need to be looked at and get a fine balance between them. I know it's difficult, but I urge you to do it as quickly as you can. Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Lovelace in the back.
Hello, my name's Pat Lovelace, your official peace delegate. I want to comment on public participation. A couple of weeks ago, you had the Tacoma Junction and the co-op on the list to talk about, and people showed up in droves to talk about that meeting. That meeting didn't end until about 12 o'clock midnight. And it was a couple of hours that we had the public comment period. And I'm very proud of the city and the people of our city for coming up and taking part. And people are starting to realize how important their 3 minutes are. And I'm proud of the Young Activist Club, too, for coming out. And I'm glad to see the amount of public participation today. It was great. I'd like to see more of this. But anyway, I want to tell you people, it's 15 more days until voting time. So please don't forget that. Election day is November 4th. So please don't forget it. It's a very important election. Your midterms are very important, because we get our Senate and our Congress and all that. And I'd like to see people taking participation in that, too. I'll be down there at the poll with the peace sign. I'm down there every year for over a decade now, well over a decade. And I'd like to see other people starting to do the same thing and caring for their city and their life and their environment. That would be great. And also, Halloween's coming up. Please be aware of the children around you when you're driving, and remind your kids not to eat the candy until they get it home for their parents to check. And if you notice a kid in distress, call 911. Don't take any chances. Send them out with an adult with the group, and send them out in a good group, because you never know. You don't want to see your kid coming home high on morphine or heroin or something like that they did not know what they were getting. We don't need to see razor blades and nails in the apples anymore, because parents can catch that stuff. A child with a bag full of candy might be tempted, and he may not catch it. So please, out there, and please, City Council, make it an awareness campaign that people can be aware of the children around them. They are our precious commodity. They are our next generation of leaders. So please show your care, and don't drink and drive. It can cost you your life and also a child their life. So please be aware of the world around you and the children around you. Halloween is only 11 days away. 11 short days, and voting is 15 short days away. So please, everybody, be aware of how fast time goes. Get out there and vote. Vote, vote, vote for peace. Love it, love it, love it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I hope so.
Okay, seeing nobody else, we will move to council comments. And I'll start. I've got a couple of short comments. First, I wanted to let people know that I found something interesting in the newspaper that I was reading today. I read a number of papers, and this one is the Washington Business Journal. And on page 9, there was an ad saying that the Montgomery County Business Hall of Fame is going to be inducting new members into the Montgomery County Business Hall of Fame. There's going to be a ceremony on Wednesday, October 29th at the universities at Shady Grove, and the first listed honoree for this year is Mark Choi, owner of Mark's Kitchen. So I was very glad to see that, and very happy and surprised. I wanted to let folks know that we had a number of people comment last week at the council meeting during public comment, asking us to weigh in favor of asking the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church session to delay their request for hearing at the Montgomery County Historic Preservation Commission. We did not take action last week. We said we needed more information. In the meantime, the session met, and the hearing has been postponed, I believe, until at least November 12th. And I understand that there is a meeting set up for later this week between the neighbors and the session. So I was very happy to hear that. I also wanted to note that when I was at the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments last week, I'm the chair of the Audit Committee, and it was my first chance to meet the new Chief Financial Officer at the Council of Governments, who introduced herself to me as a resident of Tacoma Park. And she lives in Pinecrest and has been there for a few years, and I was glad that we have such good talent in the city. That's a very important job, and so I welcomed her to that job and was happy to have a chance to talk to her about, I don't remember her name, but she lives on 4th, very close to the VFW, and is part of a musical group who may appear there as well. I was also at COG Friday for the Institute for Regional Excellence I'm the chair of the advisory board of that group. It's the only regional certified public manager program in the country, and I had the opportunity to meet with the students who were having their first class session of the year-long program, and one of those is a Tacoma Park employee, Lou McAllister, from the Recreation Department. So I was glad to see that, and then I got to help provide recognition and certificates to the graduates of the 12th class of the Institute for Regional Excellence on Friday night. I also attended last Thursday night, along with Councilmember Schultz and Councilmember Smith, the joint Prince George's County Municipal Association and Montgomery County chapter of the Maryland Municipal League in Greenbelt. It was a very helpful session. We got to talk with our colleagues in Prince George's County municipalities and heard a lot of their discussion of their legislative priorities that the chapter has, and there was renewed interest in the Montgomery chapter in having some county legislative priorities as well. There was also some discussion after we had the joint meeting. We broke up into the Montgomery chapter meeting where we had some discussion on what I have taken to calling county revenue theft, which used to be called municipal tax duplication. And Deputy City Manager Ludlow helped lead that discussion along with our former city manager, Barb Matthews, since they're the resident experts. And I didn't know if you wanted to share anything, just a point or two. You don't have to. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I thought you might want to say something about that.
No, I mean, it was a good meeting, and I appreciated that the chapter was able to meet, and it was a second meeting after the joint meeting with the Prince George's County group to give some direction to the team. There's 3 members of the team representing municipalities, Barb Matthews, Marnie Shaw from Somerset, and myself. I appreciated that we were given direction to continue a hard line with the county task force. We do meet on Thursday, so we'll be taking back our comments.
And did all of my colleagues on the council get the handout that you had? Kind of went through the
Probably
points?
not. That's something that I'll make sure everybody gets
if
that
you can
information. There was
send
several. Yeah, there were several different pieces of information, all of which were some of which were more interesting than others. One person who was one of the non-municipal members submitted comments, kind of wondering what good is a municipality anyway. But
yes.
I think
and another question that was submitted was, is Tacoma Park exceptional?
And I said, absolutely.
And I thought, well, my answer would be yes, but no.
But in any event, I will share that information.
Good, thanks. Just 2 other quick things. I wanted to let people know that there are a number of things coming up this Saturday. I've got 3 events listed for this Saturday, October 25th. 10 to 3 is the Friends of the Tacoma Park, Maryland Library book sale. 1 to 5 is the Monster Bash, where I believe you go up to Tacoma Junction to the city lot, and that's the Halloween festivities. And then from 10:30 to 12 on Saturday, the Tacoma Park Tree Commission and the arborist are going to be leading a walk in Circle Woods and in Sligo Mill Woods. And it's going to be looking at what's going on in those 2 properties, which are both open space, not parks, but, reserved open space. So I think the word on that has been a little slow in getting out, so I wanted to make sure that people knew about that. And my final point is that I had the good fortune to come into the parking lot at this building on Saturday, just as the people who were picking potatoes were loading them up to take them. This was sweet potatoes that had been planted in the community garden over in front of the mural at the library building, and they harvested about 60 pounds of sweet potatoes, and the biggest one I saw was longer than a football and about softball diameter, and it looked like a duck. So there are some really interesting pictures of the sweet potatoes that were harvested, and I know that some of the kids who were involved in that were quite amazed at the sweet potatoes that came out of the ground. And that's all I've got. Other comments from other colleagues? Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. I have a request to put something on the agenda in the future. It's discussing the policy of the police department photographing of minors. I know this is something, I can't remember, Councilman Seamers, did you bring this up last week? It's an issue, and I think we spent a great deal of time a few months ago talking about license plate readers and other things, and I think this is an issue that as a council we should be discussing. Things like, how many pictures are we taking of young people in our community? How are they being stored and used? And if this is a policy that we have and we believe it's one that may help us in crime fighting, that's one thing, but how is that straining potential relationships between young people in our community and the police department? So I'd like to have that conversation in the future, please.
And the other part of that question is it being done equally across?
Yes.
Is that it?
Mm-hmm, that's it.
Councilmember Bale.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to touch on a few issues. Last week we spoke about snow policies and identified some subset of priorities among those issues, and I think the intent of council was to move forward with potentially some actions before the snow begins. I hadn't heard those yet on the mayor's list of future agenda items, so I just wanted to remind us all of that in hopes to hear about it and hear a scheduled date for it sometime in the near future. I wanted to mention that this week is apparently National School Lunch Week, and tomorrow one of the undersecretaries of the U.S. Department of Agriculture will be at the Tacoma Park Middle School having lunch with school children to celebrate that event. And I think, as far as I know, all local politicians have been invited to that. And then just the last issue that I wanted to mention quickly was with regard to parking. And we'll get to talk about this again, but juxtaposing the conversations about the co-op and the development at the junction lot with parking considerations, there we have 50 spaces worth of parking, and we shouldn't forget that even if that is not now a fully used parking lot, it may become so in the future. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
Just wanted to mention one thing that I did want to mention a week ago, but there were too many other things to discuss, and that is that I wanted to extend a big thank you to Police Chief Alan Goldberg and the city manager, who both took time out of their regular schedules to meet with myself, a couple constituents on Wildwood Drive in my neighborhood, and the pastor of the Zions Lutheran Church to talk about the problems with noise from events that are held at the church. This has been a problem going back, I don't know, at least close to 20 years. It was a very frank discussion, and I think what it did, it helped our police chief get fully cognizant of the scope and the duration of the problem, and started a dialogue that needed to be started involving all the affected parties. We had a chance to hear the pastor and some of his people, their point of view about what the church has tried to do to meet the needs of the community. It's the kind of, I just think it was a constructive meeting. The proof is still in the pudding, which is still in the oven. We'll see how it all works out in the future, but this is an important first step, and I owe a big feeling of gratitude towards the city manager and the chief for being at this meeting and taking a good bit of time to talk to the pastor about the issues and hear my constituents express their frustrations, which have been pretty serious over the years. So thank you.
Anybody else? City manager's comments.
Thank you. Just one, that I believe we've gotten confirmation from the new Washington Adventist Hospital president, Eric Wingsness, to come and just do a very short meet and greet on November 3rd. So I think that will be happening right at 7:30. Just an opportunity for council to meet him. Nothing substantive, but just an opportunity to meet and greet. I believe he is on his 4th week on the job at this point, so he's pretty new. Thanks.
Thank you.
I had a follow-up question for the city manager. It's a little unclear to me with regard to our traffic calming policy and ordinance, whether street closures or one-way, changing streets to one-ways are part of that section of code. My understanding was that it was not, but then I heard it discussed as an issue and talked to the Public Works Director a little bit about that. So if the city manager could confirm that those are not options that go through the permit resident request process, or if indeed they are, then confirm that as well.
Anything else? Okay, we don't have any minutes to adopt this evening, so we will go to our special session item, which is a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for mulch storage facility walls. Did I see the Public Works Director? Did you want to say anything about this, or the city manager?
Really not much to it. We're trying to improve the appearance of our mulch storage area at the Public Works Yard and have identified these precast concrete walls, which we installed last year for a little site storage area to enclose the mulch area around the Public Works facility. We had previously a chain link fence during the previous Public Works renovation. The improvement of that was put aside as a limitation of funding, so this is just following through to complete that part of the project.
Okay. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Braithwaite, is there a problem with leaching of the or runoff from the mulch beds down into the creek below?
Well, we have a couple of things that we do to address runoff from the asphalt pad that the mulch is prepared on. We have a drainage trench adjacent to the facility that's basically serves as a biofiltration unit, similar to others where it's got rocks and stone and soils, and then it runs down. We don't have any erosion issues as a result of the runoff of that. Also in season, we put hay bales around the outer edge of the facility just to slow any water flow. We don't do any water testing, so we're not aware. I don't have any, concrete data on that. But the area where the water drains to is a swale and a earthen side of the slope down to the intermittent stream, which ends in the wetland that was recently created by Park and Planning. So I'm not aware of any water quality issues related to that.
All right, thank you.
Would somebody like to move this ordinance?
Move it.
Or here, second?
I'll second.
Moved by Councilmember Siemens, seconded by Councilmember Smith. Any additional council discussion on this? Okay, it's a single reading ordinance. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Schultz?
Aye.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens?
Aye.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yes.
Councilmember Mayo?
Aye.
Councilmember Grimes?
Yes.
Mayor Williams?
Aye. That passes unanimously. We will now go to our work session, and we have 2 items on the work session agenda. The first one is a discussion of parking in neighborhoods adjacent to commercial areas. And I know staff has some.
Yes, thank you. We have a PowerPoint presentation, which we are also should be coming around as well. I would say use this one that we've just passed out as opposed to the one that's in your packet, because there are a few slides at the end which we've gotten some additional data on as of last night. Okay. And so I wanted to make sure that the most recent information is there. So please use the one we just passed out. I think it will come up so everybody can see it.
I think you're in charge.
If you want to go stand down there, it's really nice.
Yeah, it's really, I've been down there before, facing that way. It wasn't so nice. I just wanted to start out just by saying a couple of things. One is, I think when I came on board a little bit over a year ago, one of the first meetings that I went to was on parking. and I've gone to at least 2 other parking-related meetings since then, and so I appreciate the feedback from residents, from council about the importance of parking. That's the first thing. Second is that I very much view this as a first step in terms of trying to understand the situation a little bit better, really having city staff even collect some additional data and data points on parking so that we can be mindful in terms of some of the direction or observations that we provide to council as you all consider and think about next steps as it relates to parking, particularly parking in neighborhoods adjacent to commercial areas. Finally, just on parking enforcement, I just want to continue to encourage people, if they see parking, traffic, or other violations, to please continue to call the police. That is incredibly important. The way that we get data and information is by getting made aware of that. So I just want to continue to encourage people to continue to make the police aware if you see parking-related violations. For the parking discussion, we wanted to just cover a few points. Talk a little bit about some of the citywide parking overview, a little bit of data on permits and tickets in the city, looking particularly at parking in the old town area in particular. I know that that has been the subject of at least 2 of my conversations that I've had, is parking around one of our most active and growing commercial areas. Some observations that we found, some recommendations that we're thinking about as well, some options for the council to consider going forward, and then just next steps. First, parking citywide, and I apologize if the map is a little bit difficult to read, but we just wanted to provide a bit of a key. Sometimes it's even hard for us to get this, so this map is incredibly helpful, which is where all the parking permitted areas are in the city right now. There are 6 zones that are identified here. The colors are a little bit difficult to see probably on the PowerPoint, at least the one I'm looking at. Hopefully in your handout it's a little bit clear. But we have a variety of different parking regulated areas in the city. Obviously, some of the largest areas are adjacent to our commercial areas, adjacent to our one of our primary public transportation methods, which is Metro. So areas 1, 1A, 2A, and 2 are those areas that are right close to the D.C. border, right close to the Metro, as well as close to the Old Town Tacoma area. So just in terms of size, that comprises some of the largest parking restricted areas. On the right-hand side, we have a bit of a key that says what some of those restrictions are. Obviously, areas around the Metro have some daytime, mostly parking restrictions to preclude people from parking, going to work, and coming back at the end of the day. Some of the other parking restrictions in Zones 5 and Zone 6 are really overnight parking restrictions to deal with some of the spillover into the residential neighborhoods from some of the other establishments that are there from non-residents in that area. We also have some individual metered parking and some individual street-related restrictions as well. Just wanted to also point out again that we have 105 parking meters in the city that are primarily located in the Old Town, the Junction, and clustered around Montgomery College. We also, at the Junction, recently installed a pay station, the city's first, and so there are 34 public spots available at the Junction. That is in addition to the roughly 16 or so that the co-op leases as well at the Junction. Just some language from the city's code on permit parking. It sets forth a process where residents can request the establishment of a permitted parking area. It's got some information in terms of some of the factors for consideration in designated a parking area. It also speaks a little bit to some of the prohibitions, particularly single block requests, until or unless an adjacent area has an existing parking area, and some of the information about the percentage of households in terms of the petitioned area that have to be supportive of that effort. Currently, right now, we've got about 622 residential permits available, residential permits that have been issued There are 10 business permits currently issued in the city as well.
And those are individual permits as opposed to the business that gets a group of them?
Those are individual permits. I will.
And then in addition to what's
Yes.
listed here, there's a cumulative 43, was it, permits and issued to nonprofits.
That's exactly right.
That are not listed under businesses here.
That's right.
And those are exclusively nonprofits that are housed at the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church.
I believe so, yes. Some information on current ticketing law. This is obviously as it relates to enforcement. And then just straight from our code, just some sample descriptions of what our fine and penalty structure is as it relates to some of these ticketing offenses. Just wanted to give a quick breakdown of some of the residential parking tickets that have been issued over the past 12 months. I think, if you think about the citywide parking map, you would expect that the majority of the tickets would probably be in our largest permanent parking areas, which is indeed the case, which is in areas 1, 1A, 2, and 2A. So I believe that's close to 65% of total tickets are issued in those areas. And then we've got about 20% in Area 3, close to 15% in Area 6, and the rest scattered between Areas 5 and 4. Again, just giving a sense about where the majority of residential parking tickets are issued in the city.
Is this a year?
It is over the past 12 months, yes. In particular, when we started thinking about some of the questions around parking in the commercial districts, so we've sort of talked citywide here for a second, and as we sort of drill down a little bit into commercial parking, one of the comments that has sort of been has had a common thread amongst many of those conversations has been residential neighborhoods that are adjacent to commercial areas, and some of the pressures that some residents this evening mentioned around parking challenges, primarily either from commercial businesses that are located next to them or other non-residents potentially parking in that area. So we wanted to try to drill down a little bit on some of those, and sort of highlighted in yellow was sort of our attempt to just kind of look at a sample of residential neighborhoods that are directly adjacent in the Old Town area in particular. This may not be necessarily all of them, but I think it gives a decent understanding of some of those streets that I know we've heard some challenges. I know I've personally received some emails in the past from residents on some of these streets as it relates to some of the parking challenges next to the commercial area. We'll be coming back to some of these streets here in a second, a little bit later in the presentation. It was mentioned a little bit earlier about some of the new commercial businesses that are coming to our commercial district. We again, just a sampling of some of the commercial businesses that have come, particularly in the Old Town and the Junction area in the past year, as well as some that are quickly going to be coming online here in the immediate future. Obviously, one that's generated a lot of interest is the Busboys and Poets, which I've heard August, September, October, November, and December as it relates to when it will open, so theoretically it opens soon. I guess the owner, Andy Shalal, came to the city offices a few months ago, and we talked to him a little bit about parking and some other issues, and just wanted to get some takes from him. Some of the information that he stated was that, in particular, for his other stores, and he doesn't necessarily think that the restaurant that's going to be located in Tacoma, D.C. is going to be any different. He provides a transportation subsidy to his employees. In other words, he encourages them not to drive effectively to the store or to the restaurant. He's mentioned that for his other restaurants, many of his employees live within a certain radius of the store. It makes it easier for him to staff. It makes it easier for them to get to and from work. He believes that will likely be the case at this store as well, is that a majority of those employees will be living somewhat close to the restaurant in some way. enabling them to be able to enjoy the transportation subsidy. He commented that the Tacoma DC store would be very different than, let's say, the Hyattsville store, in that he was describing some of the parking challenges that they've had at Hyattsville, which really is that they don't have a lot of commercially available parking options. Parking is very limited over at that store or that restaurant, and he was hopeful that there would be more parking available, commercially available parking available in the Tacoma DC restaurant, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on in the presentation, but we think that there is significantly more commercially available parking as a potential in and around the Tacoma DC location. So we were encouraged by that. He also, seemed very willing to want to continue to work with the city and work with residents as it relates to parking. I mean, he understands that he's on the DC side, so he's really paying a lot of attention, obviously, to DDOT and some of those folks. But he seemed very interested in, and really, he said when he was scouting out store locations, I mean, he thought that it was a natural that Tacoma and Tacoma Park would be a perfect location to put Busboys and Poets. So he seemed very open to continued conversations. One of the things that we have tried to work with, and I really credit the Old Tacoma Business Association with this, is that they really have taken the lead in trying to get an understanding of what some of those commercially available parking options are in and around the Old Town area in particular. They have gone out and actually talked to these four parking either operators and or locations. And here's just a description of the parking spaces that they have available, particularly for evening use. So these are lots that are currently there right now that may be used during the daytime, but really during the evening time are not open for commercial parking. I think the good part about this, about seeing that there are roughly 360, a little bit over 500 spaces in the Old Town area, is that those are spaces that the city, as an example, wouldn't have to build. These are spaces that could be open in the evening time that currently are not. And I think the not is important, which is that there is not really a tipping point right this second. There's no economic reason for many of these commercial establishments to open their parking in the evening currently. I know that the Old Tacoma Business Association has also experimented with valet parking in the Old Town area to also provide some additional parking options for commercial parkers. Obviously, valeting is going to be putting cars likely in a lot someplace, so putting it where it probably needs to go. So that has been helpful, and also OTBA has been very helpful in putting together a parking map showing where some of the commercially available parking options are as people come to Tacoma Park. I think that was something that I know in a couple of conversations around parking that we've had over the past year has been important, which is that many of these new establishments are bringing residents as well as non-residents to Tacoma Park, and perhaps as a non-resident you may be coming to Tacoma Park for the first time, and so you may not know immediately where to park at. And so having something that lets potential customers know, so restaurants and other establishments can let their customers know where commercially available parking is, but also creating and posting parking availability maps on websites and starting to do some printed versions of that is helpful, because then I think as people hopefully continue to come back to Tacoma Park and its commercial establishments, they will learn and know where to go parking. I think when most of us go out to eat, as an example, we pretty much know where we're going to park at if we've been there a couple of times. We want to continue to build that kind of infrastructure as people come to Tacoma Park over the next few years. The next thing we wanted to do, and I apologize for the small print on this, so I'll try to go through it a little bit slowly, is we wanted to take a look at, for some of those residential streets that are adjacent to commercial areas in the Old Town area in particular, we wanted to get a little bit of data around sort of who's parking there, how many total parking spots are available, to get a sense of capacity, really. So what's the extent of the problem that we may be facing? And so I'll walk you through the first one, which is the 7100 block of Maple Avenue, and on a few other slides you'll see some of the other streets that are listed. Over the past week or so, and I think those dates are from Saturday, October 11th through Sunday, October 19th, we actually had the police go out and do counts of cars. They didn't look at license plates. I want to make that very clear. They didn't do any part of that. But they did do counts of cars on the blocks to see who was parking there. They were also, we asked them to do two things. One is to do the total car count at two different times. One was 8 p.m. and one was midnight. And then the second piece of information we asked of them was to see which cars had residential parking permits and which did not. The idea is that we wanted to see who was sort of parking on a residential street. Was it mostly those people that had permits or mostly those people who didn't have permits? And then we wanted to be able to compare that against what we thought were the total number of parking spaces that was available on that block. So it's one thing to know how many cars are parked there. It's another to see, are you fully parked up on that block? Do you have any capacity or any room left? And so the way to read this chart is you've got the two times listed, 8 p.m. and midnight, for the days Saturday, October 11th, Tuesday, October 14th, Wednesday, October 15th, Thursday, October 16th, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Are these representative days? You know, we're hopeful so. There were no religious holidays, I don't believe. Their school was in session. These are just average days in the week. The total number of cars that were parked is the entire length of the bar, versus the darker part is the number of cars that had permits, and then the lighter portion of the bar is the number of cars that did not have permits. The top line that is dotted green is the total number of available parking spaces on that block. And so if you see a bar that doesn't exactly get up to the dotted line, it likely means that there's some capacity on that block, that not all the cars were parked, that there still were parking spots available. You'll see a couple of places on these graphs where the line is above the green line. Thank goodness for smart cars and other smaller vehicles that are able to fit in, and so occasionally you can get a little bit more. But we wanted to put that green line there to sort of show what we think is a normal parking situation, knowing that occasionally you get a couple of people that can cram two smart cars into a potential location. So for the 7100 block of Maple at these times, I mean, as you can see, we had a couple of nights, a couple of times during the day where we were at where the parking was at capacity, but largely during the other times that were checked, the block was not at capacity. Next, we went to the 7100 block of Willow Avenue, did the same car count calculation. As you can see, we had one night around 8 p.m. on Wednesday, October 15th that reached capacity. Largely the other times not at capacity. In general, as you look at these charts, we're seeing that maybe roughly half, and at least half, if not more in many cases, of the number of cars parked there did have permits. And so that was something else that we just noted when we did the car counts. Next, we went to the 6900 block of Westmoreland, 22 spots available. Again, you can see the data. .500 block of Tulip. I think out of the streets that we took a look at, that one seemed to be the one that was trending higher towards capacity, I think, in general. It also has only 9 spots, so that may be part of it too. But as you can see, you've got of the 7 or so nights that we took, 3 were right at capacity, and we had some other nights that were very close to being at capacity. Next, we wanted to take a look at how our parking meters, which again are sort of clustered in the Old Town area in particular, how are those parking meters being used? So in addition to commercially available parking options, in addition to residential, we've got parking meters that are on our streets. We have a total of 53 metered parking spaces. An interesting I think from our perspective, an interesting note was that we never got to capacity in parking meters. People are not utilizing, at least in this week, they are not utilizing our parking meters to the extent that that they are available, which again speaks to capacity in having commercially available parking locations. It seems from this data set, at least, it seems as though we would have some capacity.
May I mention also that there are many meters on Eastern Avenue Northwest and Laurel Street Northwest in the district, and I've observed only during the workday because I work near there and have done counts both in Tacoma Park and in the District of Columbia that I've never observed the meters at capacity during the workday, but we should include the ones in the district in conceiving of the Old Town Commercial District.
Great.
But the difference is when their meters are in effect, because certainly ours are not in effect after 7, but I'm not sure about the ones in D.C. I think they go a little bit later.
I don't know either because, as I said, I've looked only during the workday.
And I just want to reinforce that everything you're showing us here, both the parking meters and the permit areas, all of this is measuring when neither the parking meters nor the permit areas are in effect.
Exactly.
So this is basically anybody can park there.
Anybody can park there.
And so it's helpful to know whether people had permits or not, but you didn't have to have them during those hours.
That's right. We an observation that we'll make later on about the parking meters is also just on the on the Tacoma Park side, our meters largely end at around 6 p.m. and so perhaps having better ways to notify people that these spots are available and free currently is something that we might want to undertake, because these are free parking spots that are not being used, that are meant for commercially for the commercial businesses and their customers. So some observations that we made based upon the data and just based upon just some of our discussions about this. I mean, obviously, we want to continue to have successful commercial areas. Some of those areas can be categorized or characterized as having vibrant, active street life, different forms of transportation, variety of parking options. You know, we want to continue to have our commercial businesses flourish, and having parking available for them is important to that. It appears as though that the evening parking needs of the existing businesses appear to be met, and that is largely by the fact that we've got capacity around our parking meters themselves, as well as it seems as though we've got some availability of even on-street parking in the residential neighborhoods, particularly in the evening time, as it relates to the data that we've collected. Finally, you know, we have these 520 spots that are not being utilized at all in the evening time currently. That are existing. They're already built. You know, I think that there's some thoughts perhaps later on in terms of how we might be able to get some of the operators to be able to utilize these spots in the evening time in particular, and maybe even in the daytime if they see a need in the commercial area. Next, just some observations in the residential neighborhoods. You know, again, parking concerns have been raised. They've been raised about specific locations, specific time periods. Also, just echoing some of the comments from tonight about thinking about parking as it relates to the future businesses that are going to be coming to in particular to the Old Town area and some of our commercial districts. You know, some things I think that are important just to consider is that street parking it's a public good. You know, it's available for the public, and it's got to balance a lot of different needs. I was at a meeting, public community meeting last week, and you know, we were talking about sort of public good and how do you sort of balance parking needs of residents and non-residents, and you know, it's never going to be perfect, but it's something that we've got to think about. You know, something else that I think is important to also think about, especially in our commercial areas, is safety. You know, I don't think in our residential neighborhoods next to our commercial areas we want barren streets because we want more eyeballs, we want more activity, we want more people, largely for safety and security reasons. And so, you know, I don't think we want to just completely exclude you know, non-residents from parking on our public streets, because we need and we appreciate having some activity on those areas. We also did, we asked our HCD staff to do a count, actually, of in those residential areas that are surrounding our commercial district. And I think we actually also went up to, and I'll look at Sarah, we also went up close to the junction with the count of driveways. Did we do that? Did not include the junction. Okay, so just a count of residential homes that are close to the Old Town area to see how many of them had driveways. Again, another outlet or valve as it relates to parking. Not saying that a driveway accommodates every resident's complete cars, but it certainly provides another option as it relates to people being able to park close to their homes. And we found the overwhelming majority, and if overwhelming is identified, I mean, it's the overwhelming majority of residential homes have driveways close to the commercial area. So that, again, is just an observation that we wanted to provide for the council as you all consider some of these parking-related issues. Based on the data, again, in the residential neighborhoods surrounding the commercial areas, it does not appear that, that at least all of the streets are filled to capacity most nights. Again, it was a representative sample, but we wanted to provide that data. In addition, the permitted cars that are able to park on the block are able to do so. So not only do we have capacity, but it seemed as though we were able to, for most nights, again, there were some nights that that seemed like that was not the case, but for most nights, the permitted cars in particular were able to park. So it wasn't just that you had capacity, but that permitted cars were able to park. I think it's important to point out, though, where on that block they park is not known. So was a resident able to park directly in front of their home? Did not, and we will not be counting that part of it. But we just wanted to provide a sense of was there parking available on that block in particular. We might be missing a recommendations page on this, which I will just speak to.
Yeah, page 17.
I'm not sure that's not on here.
It's probably the page before this one.
Yeah, I think there should be a recommendations page on here, but I will just speak to it. Some of the recommendations that I think we have coming from this discussion are that the city, at least currently, in our opinion, should not be trying to build a new parking structure in the Old Town or Tacoma, D.C. area. We believe that there's untapped capacity as it relates to existing commercially available parking options. So I think spending city money to do that would not be in our best interest at this juncture. Furthermore, I think that the city should, sort of our recommendation that the city should continue to monitor the parking activity in the Old Town Tacoma, D.C. area, as well as the adjacent residential blocks to determine the impact on residential neighborhoods of the new and expanding businesses using some of this data that we've collected. So this is really the first time we've gone out and actually tried to quantify this problem. Based upon that, we think that there's some capacity. We're certainly starting to see some pressure, I think, particularly on Tulip in particular. But right now, I think we're still trying to figure out, exactly what the extent of the problem or how potentially difficult that problem is. And so I think we've started to collect some good data now. And then the final recommendation is to start to evaluate some options, really starting in the spring of next year. That will be theoretically after Busboys and Poets opens in particular, getting a sense about what some of the commercial impact of parking will be on some of the residential streets around there. That might be a good time to revisit whether or not there's some things that the council and the city may want to think about. Some of those things for the council and the city to think about are listed in the options
And
page.
before you go on to the options, can I just get you to clarify?
Sure.
Anything you can say about the decisions to just measure in the evening and just measure in the particular area that you did, since some of the concerns that have been expressed are in Tacoma Junction and some of them are daytime issues?
So for daytime issues, I know that we've got some existing parking regulations, or particularly around the metro, that preclude daytime parking. So one of the reasons why I wanted to look at, particularly in the Old Town area, nighttime parking, is because I've heard personally that when people come home from work and or in the evening time, that people are experiencing some particular parking challenges. And so that was sort of the decision in the Old Town area. As it relates to just looking at the Old Town area, it just seemed to be, again, a focus of some of the conversations I think that at the junction, we've got the junction lot that I think most people would say is largely underutilized, continues to be underutilized. I know that we may have some additional parking stress that may be happening in and near some of the residential neighborhoods around the junction, and that's something we can continue to look at over the next couple of months if that's a direction that the council would like us to sort of look towards.
Because I'm also thinking about the potential in the relatively near term, if we do go ahead with any redevelopment of the city lot, that option for parking would be foreclosed, at least for the period of construction, and so therefore it's kind of a different perspective on what's going on in the junction, and it might be good to be armed with some good data about kind of where we are heading into that.
That's right.
And to try and be proactive with that as well.
That's right. And the good thing about any potential redevelopment on the junction is that, we will control we will control the timeline for that. So I think we'll have a very good sense about when that would happen, in particular, as opposed to having to guess when something's going to open.
And could I just echo what the mayor's asking for? I think to look at the junction sooner rather than later, not just because of the redevelopment in that area. I understand there is the city lot, but given, as we've talked about, how difficult it is to cross the street in that area, that there is really not an incentive to park there and to visit, whether it's the yoga studio, now Mad Fitness. We are going to have a bakery there, the pizza parlor, a number of things that residents have talked about. So I think it is a unique situation that we should probably understand better, given where are people parking, especially during the daytime hours. So I ask that be prioritized a little bit.
Perfect. Some of the options to think about as we continue to think about parking. Again, currently our existing petition process, there may be some consideration of allowing for single blocks in some areas, and maybe those areas are adjacent to some of our more active commercial areas, to be able to individually petition for expansion of permitted parking times. Thinking a little bit about some restructuring and or standardization of parking district regulations. On the enforcement side, I think that our police largely have our times down in terms of where our existing parking permitted areas are. As we introduce more parking regulated areas and perhaps different times, we may want to think about standardizing them in some way. So perhaps those areas that are immediately adjacent to the Old Town area may have similar hours, just to make enforcement a little bit easier, as opposed to allowing single blocks to have individually different hours. So just maybe some standardization of how we introduce some additional parking that we may want to think about going forward. Thinking a little bit about, and we've talked about this a little bit when we started to install the pay station at the junction, sort of an enhancement of our parking meter system. Being able to clearly identify when our parking meters are enforced, and that's honestly because we think that we want to utilize them more, as opposed to we want for people to pay money to park at our parking meters. I think that if people understood more that our parking meters end at 6 and are not thinking that they're in the District of Columbia where that parking meter goes till 10 p.m., which I think is the reason why people are not parking at those parking meters, is because they think that it goes later. But on the stem of the thing, it says exactly when the parking is enforced still. But I think people are just afraid of doing that. So providing more notification about when our parking meters are enforced hopefully will encourage people.
Because if they're trying to read the meter and it's dark, they're not going to be able to read it.
They're not going to read the meter. There's that. We've talked about in the past providing for more payment options, obviously, as well. I know lots of different places, jurisdictions are going to credit cards, cell phone, mobile parking, something we continue to look at. Obviously, there's a cost that goes with making some of those decisions, and so we want to make sure that we're being mindful of the cost-benefit analysis of when we do that. Continuing to work with the Old Tacoma Business Association on making lots of these existing parking lots available, talking to restaurants and businesses so that they can let their customers know that these options are available, and continuing to promote additional means by which people can park in our commercial areas will continue to be important. And then finally, obviously, continuing to explore additional transportation options in our commercial areas. It's not just cars. Car share, bikes, and other forms of transportation to and from our commercial areas will continue over time to be important. So we want to make sure that we continue to provide as many options as possible for people.
And if I can get a clarification on one of your recommendations, the page 17 that you don't have on the on the digital one, where you say evaluate options in spring 2015. When I see that, I think, we start with budget in April, and if we're evaluating in the spring, when does spring start? And so I guess I'd ask for your thoughts on why you say spring and maybe not winter.
I think, and spring can mean lots of things. I guess for me, spring was sort of March, April-ish, sort of after Busboys and Poets has opened, after we've sort of gotten through December and January, which I know can be a little bit difficult in terms of evaluating. Getting closer out of February as well, because parking may just be impacted by snow and other things. So I'm thinking when the weather gets a little bit better, but still early enough that we might be able to include anything on the budget side if we wanted to do that. So,
because I guess April. I'm just thinking, I would encourage, and I guess I have some say in this matter since I set the agenda, that I'd like to get it on earlier than spring, so that we're more proactive and ahead of it. I don't want to have the feeling that we wish we had a little more time and it's hard to do because it's budget.
Gotcha.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Kenner, for this presentation. I think it was very helpful. I think it's important for us to continue doing these periodic samples as we move forward so that we can see if this is really more, whether this is an aberration or whether this is what's really going on. One of the things that I'm not sure how we would measure, but that seems to be lacking from this, and that is, residents in one of these neighborhoods near the commercial districts, if they are looking for a parking spot along the street and it's not in front of their house or near their property within another couple of properties, then there's no parking, even if it does exist on down the street. So I'm not sure how you would capture that information, that the density of parking near the commercial area might be higher, although there is available parking on further down the street away from there. And I would just encourage my colleagues that although things look kind of nice now, it's behooves us. It is getting dense enough that we should be developing a plan before we have a problem. I think that's where we're headed. Thank you.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kenner and staff, for putting this together, and thank you for the individuals who have come out this evening for this particular item. I will also thank especially Francis Phipps, who has been banging the drum for a coordinated, comprehensive analysis not only of parking requirements for residents and businesses, but also of associated traffic flows throughout the area. That sounds like a good idea to me, and it's one that perhaps, now taking what Mr. Douglas remarked, we have, he remarked on 3 questions. One was enforcement, a second was near-term steps, and a third was longer-term planning. I don't think we need to do that planning next month, but as you, Mr. Mayor, stated, on the earlier side of 2015, to move toward that, I think would be a good thing, noting the budget cycles and that there's no money budgeted for the current fiscal year, which ends June 30th. I do have significant enforcement concerns on two sides of the ledger. One side, I will represent stuff that is not in my ward, but rather in Councilmember Mail's ward, which is essentially over-enforcement that is, from where I sit, insensitive, while I have had several complaints of individuals in my ward of under-enforcement, in particular vehicles that are blocking driveways. The police don't respond to those situations. The response, I should say they don't respond adequately. The response that we got in one particular incident on this 500 block of Tulip that you have data showing us a particular problem was, well, the car, which I observed 2 feet into the driveway, was not absolutely blocking the vehicle from getting in and out of the driveway. Therefore, the police car that drove up as I was standing there with the resident just drove on without doing anything about it. To me, that's unacceptable, except that I've been forced to accept it. So that was what led, that kind of incident is what led to our engaging a half-time parking enforcement or nuisance basement officer. Has that person started yet?
They've not. We've got candidates, and they should be hired very soon, actually.
Yeah. I would, I guess, ask you specifically, the police chief and the city manager, to think about better directing the parking enforcement staff that we have and reconsidering the role that the police officers, the sworn officers, play in parking enforcement to perhaps better match the needs that you get. Yes, we can and should call on residents to contact the police if they do observe a problem, and we should endeavor to respond better when people do call in with their problems. I don't think we've been going adequately there. I could talk for half an hour. I will not do that because I'm not the only one up here. I think the data that the police department collected is very useful. I will observe that we have baseline conditions which show some capacity, but that the spikes, the occasional conditions cause a lot of dissatisfaction. I'm thinking of one particular date in June on a Saturday morning when the area that we have principally been talking about was parked up by a funeral at the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church. That led me to talk to the pastor there and involve Laura Barclay from the Old Tacoma Business Association, who did the research about available parking, and they agreed to find parking for events of that nature in the future off-site, off those residential streets. Still, there are going to be other spikes due to events, and that is what really causes a lot of dissatisfaction. The enforcement issues, when people don't see the enforcement for clear violations, when there are spike events that are not well managed and not well responded to. So I would ask you to consider baseline versus spikes, and then also what the mayor got at, that about the need to consider conditions during the day as well. Going back to what Mr. Douglas said about nearer term steps while we prepare to plan to do a study, I would endorse doing a study. I think that there is very good reason to be concerned about what is going to happen when Busboys and Poets opens. Hope at this point, I guess December is what I had heard, but it will be soon. Within a few months in any case, and that will have a particular impact on Maple Avenue, the 7100 block. Enforcement is one answer, but then again, a lot of that parking is going to be during the evening. And I would anticipate, I would hope we can take additional steps there. It hasn't been clear that there's been a neighborhood consensus to extend the residential zone hours into the evening. It's something that I have discussed with residents, and it's been discussed a bit on the email list. Also, steps like adding a paid parking on blocks such as the 7100 block of Maple, not via individual meters at spaces, which is inflexible, but rather via a ticketing system like the one we installed at Tacoma Junction, where people with residential permits would not have to pay. Only people who don't have residential permits. In any case, I do see a need for concern that is not reflected in this presentation for the near term, for the impact in particular of Busboys and Poets opening up. There are other possibilities for creating additional parking. The city had a discussion with the property owner of the Laurel Avenue Tacoma Shopping Center, John Urciolo, a number of years ago, probably 6 to 8, about putting metered parking in his lot, and the city would pay the costs, I guess, of installing that, even though it was a private lot. I would like to pursue something similar, although I see difficulties, but with the owner of the lot at Willow and Carroll, that lot could be reconfigured to create, my estimate is around 20 additional spaces, and it already serves as a parking resource for other than the tenants and the patrons of the businesses of the property there. So that is a possibility that I think the city should pursue. You and I have discussed that, although not in quite a while, so I would like to bring that up again. And then finally, although as I said it could go on quite a while on various things, I don't need to do that now, I would like to reconsider the way that the city handles parking permits for specifically commercial businesses that are adjacent to residential zones. Currently, city code allows those businesses to obtain up to 3 parking permits. For instance, one revision to our permit system could be to require any business, any commercial business that requests a residential parking permit to file a transportation plan with the city that would describe how that business is promoting walking, bicycling, and transit use. Another possibility would be to limit parking permits for commercial businesses to ones that can attest that there is no commercial parking that will meet their needs. So I note again that the parking lot behind the Laurel Avenue Strip is available 24 hours a day for paid parking. Is there any reason, for instance, for the city to give a commercial business on Carroll Avenue between Tulip and Eastern Avenue, or on Laurel Avenue, a residential permit when there is commercial parking available to those businesses? I think not, so I would like to see a reconsideration of the permits there. Secondly, with parking permits, while the city code allows a commercial business to receive 3 parking permits in a nearby residential zone, it allows an unlimited number of parking permits, unlimited, for a nonprofit organization, and that has been exploited by the organizations that are housed at the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church, which we have heard is a concern currently and is a concern for the future as well, with the prospective commercial kitchen at the church. So I would like to see a reconsideration of parking permits to nonprofits. That is specifically whether we should create a similar limit on the number of permits that may be offered to a nonprofit, similar to the one that is the cap that is applied to commercial businesses, and whether those nonprofits should have similar requirements to have transportation plans in place, and then also to attest that there is no nearby commercial parking. Nearby to me means maybe within a 2-block distance that will meet their needs. So these are topics that I will intend to pursue. If anyone else wishes to comment on them this evening, that would be welcome. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Kinner, thank you very much for the presentation. Staff, I appreciate all the work you put into it. I would like to support the idea of commissioning a study on parking in the city, not just for the Old Town area, but for other parts of Tacoma Park, like Ward 6, a comprehensive study that looks at how traffic comes into the city and how it affects not just the commercial district but residential areas. Most restaurant leases are 10 years, so I think that parking is going to be more of an issue for us very shortly as these restaurants continue to increase in their popularity. Another thing that I didn't see in the study is there are 3 things that are potentially going to happen. One, Carroll Avenue Bridge is going to be closed. The junction probably will be redeveloped, and Tacoma Metro will be redeveloped. So the number of parking spaces in those areas is going to be reduced. So what is the threshold for the city to consider looking at? Do we get in the business of parking? Do we lease spaces from some of these landlords that you mentioned that have 160, 80 some spaces? What does it look like for the city to be proactive in this situation? Does the number of capacity that you showed us, does it have to be reduced by 50%, or is it more before we consider what is the next move for the city in making parking available for residents and for those people that want to come into the city to enjoy the restaurants and shops in Old Town and other parts of the city? Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. We have 5 points I want to make this evening. The first is agree with what Councilmember Smith just said in looking holistically at our parking management in our community. I think a number of residents also talked about that tonight, about the need to have an overall strategy. And I think part of that is looking at our community overall, and in particular, as I said before, I'd really like to see a similar analysis of what's going on in the junction before the spring. The second point is I think the work that the OTBA has done has been terrific and excellent. The map is a great start to help us identify where we have parking. But I also think we need to, and this is a short-term issue, really think about signage to point people who are not only people who live in our community, but are visiting our community to where parking is available. This struck me particularly last night when I was in downtown Silver Spring, that downtown Silver Spring actually does a fairly decent job with parking. I was going to the Mandalay restaurant on Bonifant, and I turned onto the street. It was dark, and I was like, oh, where am I going to park? And I immediately just looked up, and there was a sign. And it took me like 10 seconds to find a parking spot and pull in. I think we can do a better job in the short term of putting in signage for people. The fourth, to echo what Councilmember Grimes has said regarding the unevenness in parking enforcement. This is a conversation that Councilmember Mail, and I have had over the last few months, that it seems there are neighborhoods in our community that, for whatever reason, seem to be being unfairly ticketed, and other areas where we are continuing to get residents calling us, emailing us, and telling us that they can't seem to be able to get the police to actually enforce the parking restrictions. So looking at that would be very helpful. That was 4. The fourth is that I think the options that you lay on the presentation look good. I think this is a first start. In particular, looking at the single blocks for permits, I think would be a good idea. I'd like to add to that list, as Mr. Trunzo talked about, revisiting our overnight parking restrictions to see if they're adequate, if we need to adjust those. And I couldn't keep track of everything Councilmember Grimes said. However, I believe there's a lot there I would also support looking into. And finally, my fifth thing in closing, I'd like to think we could be much more forward-thinking in terms of how we address parking in our community. Before this discussion tonight, I sent around to council and members of the city staff a number of articles about how communities are looking at smart meters that adjust for supply and demand. And in Madrid, Spain, they've just put in parking meters, these smart meters that charge more for cars that pollute and less for cars that are energy efficient. I'm not sure how that's going or if that's feasible for us, but I would like us to be at least looking into those types of answers to this problem, because it's, as Councilmember Smith said, this is not going to go away. With the development that's coming in, with the redevelopment at the junction, I think we need to be much more innovative and forward-thinking. So, thank you.
Councilmember Romeo.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to address a few smaller points in this discussion and then make some broader ones. I agree with Councilmember Grimes' suggestion around it, having businesses have a transit plan in place that explains how they will encourage bicycle, pedestrian, and other forms of transit for their employees. The city manager brought up the concept of standardizing the time in which zones apply as a way to make it easier for people to remember where to park and when to move and when to pay. I myself have been here for 12 years, and I did not know you didn't have to pay after 6 o'clock until just tonight.
Want a refund?
No comment. We have a boundary, a shared boundary through many of the areas that are subject to tonight's discussion with District of Columbia. Whether they currently have or will soon have similar parking problems to ours, I don't know. But to the extent that we can do the same thing that they do, or get them to do what we do, I think that would be helpful as well, because a resident coming to go to Republic or Busboys and Poets, if they're not somebody who goes there regularly or a local resident, doesn't see the boundary, again, especially if it's dark. Councilmember Grimes brought up parking for nonprofits, and I agree that maybe there's some room to make some changes there. And so then I want to back up a little bit. I guess, to me, the obviously all around the country, the success of urban areas is changing. It may be permanent. It's not something we've ever seen before in the way it's changing, and the abandonment of cars and driver's licenses by young people dropping quite precipitously, and the massive expansion of apartment housing and mixed-use buildings with retail first story and housing above. That creates strains and challenges that we're talking about tonight. One of them we're talking about tonight, and there's no simple answer because it's an ongoing process and we don't really know where it's going. I say that by way of a preference to pushing back against the concept of a plan, especially a plan that the council approves. At least as I've seen many plans in the past 3 years. They tend to be very prescriptive and specific. And if we do those things, we make it very difficult to change as circumstances change. If we try something and it doesn't work, how do we change it? We have to go back to council discussion, and it takes however many months to schedule and so on. So I think the key part, and so this is still a plan concept, but it's maybe a bit different, is to try to identify a core set of principles that the city residents are interested in, that the council supports, and that we can come to some sort of majority or consensus on. For example, issue enough tickets to have a deterrent effect. I noticed that if you summarized all the cars that were, and this was not during a violation period, but all the cars that were parked that didn't have a permit, and you added those up, that was equivalent to all the parking tickets issued in an entire year in that zone, 150, 140-ish tickets. So a principle is issue enough tickets to have a deterrent effect on at least regular visitors. It's a little harder for people who only show up once. And then have the city implement ways to do that and try things that may not work, and residents would have to be patient with trying things that don't work to try to get to a point where they do work. Another sort of principle is residents have access to sufficient parking, in particular near their homes. And so how does the city go about achieving that? I don't have the answers, but I don't necessarily want us to endorse one specific, very prescriptive plan and then not to be able to change. So I would encourage us to plan, but to plan with have the council play a role in setting principles in place, and give the city, at least for some period of time, some discretion to try to implement that. For example, I think we could take action earlier and then give a year to see what sort of changes were made. And on that latter point, even without a plan in place, I guess I'd like to follow up on this discussion and hear from the city manager of where the manager has significant discretion right now under current ordinance and policy. Because to the extent that you have discretion, starting to use that discretion to try to address some of these issues is important. I think we've already seen that with, not necessarily perfectly successfully, but with police enforcement of zones. But certainly things like signage, right? Signage is something that you don't need council action to clarify. Working with residents on streets that have parking permits that may have different hours for those
those areas to try to get standardized signage, but also standardized hours. That's something that may have council action at the very end of it, but coordinating with residents to get a common time is not something that necessarily takes council action. And then the last piece I'd mention is, two other pieces. More data. I think it's fantastic that the city has been collecting data already. That makes it so much easier to try to figure out how to have an informed discussion and how to prioritize. So at the junction in Ward 5, as Councilmember Smith indicated, and other parts of the sort of Old Town area and beyond, I'd encourage the city to keep collecting data, including sometimes during periods of enforcement when you can also be issuing tickets and reducing violations. The last point, we talked a little bit about ways for people to pay for parking, and it obviously makes a difference. I always I never carry cash or change, and I just use a parking app if I'm in D.C., and that's fantastically easy, more than having to go get a piece of paper and stick it inside my window after I walk to some meter or somewhere down the street. We have the authority to work with COG to do contracting across jurisdictional lines in the D.C. area. And so to the extent to which D.C. or Montgomery County or anyone else has an standing contract with any of the companies that provide those app-based services, it seems to me we have room to use that, to not have to go out with an RFP, to not do an open bid contract process. I've heard this, I think it's the city manager in the past, talk about how it's difficult for us because we only have 150-ish permitted or metered spaces right now. So it's difficult for us to get a contract going with a company and not have it be prohibitively expensive. Maybe that is one way to do it and do it more quickly to get that up. But I certainly agree that if we create more options for people to pay, it would make it easier. And sorry, then one more point. I'm following Councilmember Grimes' precedent. I had a question, which is the Tacoma Business Center notes that it has 200 spaces. I wasn't aware that there were, again, my personal experience, there was ever parking in that lot. And maybe there isn't. Maybe there isn't. It's downstairs. And is it free?
It's not available right now.
Right there, too.
So they have parking. They have 200 spaces available for their tenants, but it's not currently available for resident use. And that's an example of something where we, without necessarily council action, it's poorly used space that has potentially market value to the owner of the building. And so that's an area where I hope we might take action earlier rather than waiting for another council date, just to have city staff or Laura, or anyone else start trying to get them to think about opening that up. Thank you.
That's already been in the works.
Great.
Councilmember Schultz.
Yeah, I'd first like to start by thanking not only our staff, but Laura Barkley, who's contributed a lot of the data for the presentation that we had here, and has done a lot of the research with regard to available parking in some of these commercial places which have not been historically available in the evening. And my understanding is that, as you were saying, Mr. Kenner, that there hasn't been any demand for these places to operate in the evening, and so they've never bothered to set it up that way. But the property there that has 200 spaces underneath has apparently indicated that, in fact, if there was demand, it would be worth their while to do that. So, in a sense, it's certain irony there is that the demand, as demand increases, spaces become available, and sort of voila, you have capitalism actually working. A couple questions that I want to ask first. Do the new residential units that are being built at Tacoma Central have spaces for all the residential parking?
There's a significant number of residential spaces, but I am pretty sure it's not one-to-one.
So do we anticipate that there could be a problem?
You have to come to the microphone. Sorry.
Sorry, Laura.
They do have two underground levels that are residential parking that are not for the commercial businesses. They're not for busboys.
I think everybody else has the information. I don't have an exact number, but it's a 40% for total of their total residents.
That's about the number I recall as well. And when we had community meetings with them, they indicated that I think it's the Gables over on the other side of the metro, has about one spot for every 2 units, and they haven't been able to sell all of them. So I don't think the residential parking is what the concern is, because those people probably will be very much mass transit oriented. It's really the visitors that come into the commercial that's of concern.
Okay, that basically answers. I just wanted to be comfortable with knowing that we weren't going to have more residential demand than the building was designed for.
Yeah, I researched this stuff back last December in connection to the Tacoma Metro development, and the Gables had, at that point, 50 vacant parking spaces. They had an effective parking ratio of 0.66, which means that they had 2 spaces in use for every 3 units, and they overbuilt their parking.
Okay. Besides, the other question I have is, besides Busboys and Poets, aren't there going to be other retail uses in there? Do we have any clues as to who those retail tenants will be?
In Busboys and Poets itself?
No,
in the Tacoma Central building.
In the Tacoma Central building, the whole facade between Maple and
ladies and gentlemen, Cedar Barclay.
There's 2 additional spaces. One's 1,500 on the corner of Maple and Carroll, and on the corner of Cedar and Carroll is 2,500 square feet. And as of 2 weeks ago, they weren't rented. They were in active negotiations with people, but they weren't rented.
Okay. All right. So that's just an unknown that we'll have to factor in as things roll forward. Yeah, just sit here in the front row. I would also add, I was driving around looking at some of the locations that Laura had identified, and I noticed that, for example, in the 6800 block of Laurel between Eastern and the next street down, Aspen, there's at least 28 meters there that are on the DC side that are apparently free in the evening. Most of them were empty even during the daytime today, which brings me to the question about parking meters. The primary reason parking meters exist in most municipal areas isn't as a source of revenue. It is to assure that you have turnover, so that people don't park for hours on end and make it impossible for customers who are trying to patronize businesses. And so when I see a diagram that shows that the meters in the area in Old Town, down in the area where we're talking about, are not going to be effective after 6 o'clock at night, I'm wondering, why do we have meters at all? Because we're saying, oh, well, these are going to be free meters, because what you want to do is to make sure that somebody doesn't come into Busboys and Poets and sit at the bar for 5 hours without being conscious of the existence of where their car is parking. You want those
They're in the bar for 5 hours. You don't want them out of there in our car.
Well, all right, let's say that they're just eating for 5 hours. Thank you very much. I don't need this kind of help. But, I mean, you want those meters to be effective so that there's turnover in cars. And so to have meters there that are no longer effective just when you really want to get the turnover, like after 6 o'clock at night when Busboys and Poets and the other businesses are being busy, seems to not make a lot of sense to me. I think we ought to think about making the meters work during the evening between, say, 6 and 10. If we get any revenue, whatever revenue we get out of it, that's fine. That's not the point. The point is to keep vehicles turning over. Just like you do in a restaurant. You want people to come in, sit down, and you want them to finish their dinner within a reasonable period of time so you can have a second seating. I noticed as well, in looking around, is that there's a parking lot behind the Bank of America building, and I'm wondering if anybody has talked across the street from Willow.
It's used by the tenants. There's a nonprofit behind that the same owner of the Tacoma Business Center owns that small building. It used to be
Wackenhut.
Wackenhut. I can't think of the name of the nonprofit right now.
I never see any in the evening when I'm like going to the Olive Lounge and parking in that one lot, I don't ever see any cars parked behind
It's
the bank.
closed at 5, so it does.
Well, I mean, why is it closing at 5? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Sure. So we did engage the owner of
Uh-huh.
the Tacoma Business Center, Craig Lindsay, and we had parking lot management companies come in and talk to him, because he doesn't want to run a parking lot. He'd rather turn it over to someone else who's skilled at that. And so he's talked to a couple of them, and as Brian mentioned, demand's not there to.
But it's another one that.
But he was ready as a contribution to the community. He said, I hadn't thought of making this a public lot, but if that's what's needed,
Okay.
I'm willing to.
So that could be some
consider
more
that.
spaces.
Mhm.
Okay.
That's included in the 200 count. Well, actually, the downstairs only is included in the 200 count. I didn't include the lot behind that you're referencing, so potentially there's more spaces there.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. One of the things I want us to, I'm puzzled about, I noticed that in Bethesda, along places like Wisconsin Avenue, Woodmont Avenue, Georgetown Pike, you've got, restaurants like you wouldn't believe. They're like mosquitoes over there. And yet they managed to contain the parking without going into the residential neighborhoods. And the way they do that is that they've got municipal garages that are built by Montgomery County. Right. And they're metered sometimes, and other times they're handled other ways. But they're municipal. And I'm trying to think, why isn't it possible for either the District of Columbia or Montgomery County to be thinking about the construction of a municipal garage? It's crazy for us to be thinking ever of building a garage for parking. We just can't afford to do that. You'd have to float revenue bonds to make it work, and we don't want to do that. But it seems like the District of Columbia, at least, might be interested, since they're so keen on seeing their property around Metro could be talked to about the possibility of their building some kind of commercial space sometime in the future. Not right away, obviously, because we're not going to need it right away. But it just seems if it can be done in places like Bethesda, why is it only being done in Bethesda? And that's the only thing I'm going to say about Bethesda tonight. Don't worry. The other thing is that in talking to you, Laura, earlier today, she made the point is that all of us and people who are going to be wanting to use Busboys and Poets and all the other attractions in that area, I think people are going to have to learn that to park and use and get access to those places, you're going to have to learn to accept the fact that you have to maybe park a block and a half to 2 blocks away and walk. And we're used to doing that when we go down to, say, U Street, or over to Adams Morgan and all that. We don't expect to find a space right next to the restaurant that we want to patronize. And I think that people, as you said, you use the word training. After a while, people will get used to the fact that maybe they're going to have to park a block and a half away over on an Aspen Street or Laurel Avenues in the district, and some of these other areas where the meters are sitting empty in the evening. And so I think that we help people to learn that, like others of us up here have talked about, educating people, signs that point where the available parking is, and getting the new merchants that are coming in to teach their customers where they should park is a part of the plan that we want to follow. And finally, just to reinforce what else has already been said, is I think we're going to need to encourage our police department as these new businesses come in and open, just to enforce the bloody hell out of these parking permit zones and meters, to make sure that people understand that we mean business in Tacoma Park, and you just can't roll the dice and hope that you're going to get away with it. And I think if you do that and you do that enforcement strong and hard at the beginning, the word will get around that don't mess with our parking permit zones and just stay the heck out of and find a reasonable place to park. That's all I have to say.
And Councilmember Grimes is going to give us the rest of his list.
I have 4 quick, and you know I live up to my word on quick as best I can. I have quick 4 response remarks. First of all, regarding teaching customers where to park, OTBA, once again, we have been praising OTBA, did that successfully, I believe, with Republic. Republic is very cooperative in that regard. But number 2, I think that we could do more of that. And in particular, I had a conversation with the 200 block of Tulip Avenue, which is under a lot of pressure for parking. And the person remarked to me that it seems like a lot of the parking on the 7100 blocks of Maple and perhaps Willow spilling over into Tulip is the Willow Street Yoga and the Tacoma Business Center. Part of what we might do, and this is something that I'll pursue perhaps with Ms. Barclay, is to see about a conversation with businesses such as that one about use of the parking lot that is under the building, if it can be made available for that use in the times of their operations. Number 3, Ms. Robb is left, but she was seeking in particular an extension of a residential parking zone on Manor Circle. The remark that I have to make is that will only be partially successful if we don't address the granting of permits to commercial businesses. Part of her complaint, and I know this because while my house is being renovated, I've been living on the block beyond hers on Boyd, which, by the way, I cleared with the city attorney living out of my ward, before anyone brings that up. The parking on Manor Circle is the businesses and the employees and not necessarily the business patrons only, so that those businesses could seek residential parking permits that would allow them to park on Manor, which would defeat a large part of the purpose of extending the residential zone onto Manor. So that's a remark there. And then lastly, I recall bringing up probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, before Mr. Kenner joined the staff, the idea that noting that we have a limited number of parking meters here in Tacoma Park and that technology is moving on in the sense of paying via apps and credit cards and so on, that it would be interesting to explore whether Montgomery County would allow us to essentially join their system so far as they're administering the non-cash payments to Tacoma Park meters. That would probably, well, we have this discussion with tax duplication all the time. It probably wouldn't cost them a whole lot to actually do that, but they might not wish to do it, but it's something we could explore, and that's
As long as we could set the amount.
Well, okay, thank you. I have advocated that Tacoma Park should increase its street meter parking rates to $1 an hour, which matches the rates in Silver Spring. In downtown Bethesda, and this is the other thing I'll say about Bethesda, they are $2 an hour. We underprice our parking, and I don't know what the district charges nearby here.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. 2 quick things. One, I want to underscore what Councilmember Mail said about an overall parking strategy or plan. I think when I talk about that and think about that, it is similar to the way Councilmember Mail talks about it. I think as the council, we should be setting, policy and big picture principles, and allowing the staff to look into things. And so I didn't want that to be interpreted as us needing to moving forward with certain things like working with OTBA or other areas like signage that you think could improve parking in the short term. And the second thing is, in one of the articles I circulated, it talked about how the smart meters were put in Bethesda. Montgomery County was looking at Wheaton and Silver Spring as well. I don't believe they've been put in yet, but as Councilmember Grimes said, this might be an opportunity to see if they're using that. Perhaps we can look into getting some of the smart meters and trying them out here as well.
Is the city manager looking for any additional direction from the council at this point?
No way. You've gotten a clear direction that this is something that there's a lot of interest in finding spot solutions.
and that we will revisit this in a timely fashion and try and stay ahead of things and take a comprehensive approach. Okay, thank you. We will take a very short break and come back for our last item. of it, Rob, the picture, the live picture on this little monitor doesn't work. So, for future maintenance. We're at our last item, which is a discussion of the ordinance establishing a recognition commission. This is something that we had when we had the presentation in the spring. There was general agreement, I think, on the council, with the exception of Councilmember Grimes, that we wanted to go forward with this. And Councilmember Schultz and I were going to get back together and work with the clerk to pull together whatever was needed. And we were remiss in our duty, and it kind of slipped away for a while, but we recently got back together on it. And the clerk was very helpful in pulling together draft language that we would need for an ordinance. Just a reminder that this came out of a expressed need to make sure that we did a good job of keeping track not only of future things, future recognition, but that we have a lot of catching up to do on things that have already been done that have been lost or misplaced or forgotten. There was one thing that I went to look at today with the help of Diana Cohn, who is back for this discussion, looking at what was in the, and I'm not even sure what it's called. You called it Triangle Park. I think of it as Memorial Park, across the street from the library here, between Old Philadelphia, Philadelphia, and Maple. And it's got a memorial that's obviously some kind of to veterans. And then it's got two little plaques separate from that, one of whom is for John Kaufman, Jr. Diana filled me a little bit on who John Kaufman is, but I thought, I didn't know there were any plaques over there, and I certainly don't know who John Kaufman is. He turned out to be somebody who started the Tacoma Park newsletter and ran it until 1980-something, and even before that, and eventually Sammy Abbott became the editor of the newsletter for a while, and I think people tend to think that Sammy Abbott started the Tacoma Park City newsletter. He did not. John Kaufman did. So there's, and as I went over and looked at that space, I thought, gee, we sometimes talk about where can we put, memorializations or plaques or commemoratives or those kinds of things, and we already have a memorial park set up with almost nothing in it. So it was just a realization that even when something is across the street from where you are, many times you kind of don't realize what's there. Councilmember Schultz, did you want to say anything about this?
The inspiration for this came from several sources. One, to sort of build on what the mayor was just saying, is I've traveled, all over the United States and lots of small towns and cities across Europe, and almost everywhere you go, if there's not a town square, there's at least some central memorial to the men and women lost in the wars, and also to the firefighters and police officers who've died in the line of duty, and it just occurred to me a long time ago that I didn't even know if we had such a thing. It turned out that we do, but it hasn't been tended to or updated in a very long time, which means we fought a lot of wars in the last 30 or 40 years that probably nobody who from Tacoma Park would have been recognized in such a thing. And also on a very personal note, is that a few years ago, 3 years ago now, when our daughter died, my wife and I decided we wanted to plant a tree in Tacoma Park with a plaque in her memory, and I approached the arborist about doing that, and the arborist said, well, we don't really do that in the city of Tacoma Park. There isn't any method for doing it. There's no assignment of responsibilities for doing it, or much less the maintenance of it. And I was surprised, and I thought, well, surely I'm not the only person around who feels like they want to commemorate a family member or somebody that, just a friend or whatever. Or it could be a neighborhood that says, well, we lost an important citizen in our neighborhood who's lived here and was sort of tended to be the heart and soul of our area, and we feel like it would be important to remember them. A couple, 4 or 5 years ago, when Dan Robinson was sitting on the city council, he wanted to rename the Tacoma Urban Park there at Westmoreland Avenue after a person who'd lived in that neighborhood for many years and was revered. And the city council found itself getting completely bogged down in a discussion of whether it was appropriate, how to do it, and whether the Parks Commission would allow it, and who owned the park, and whether this was overdoing it. We shouldn't name a park after somebody that was only a neighborhood figure and not a citywide figure, and as a result, nothing happened, and it was not fair, the outcome. So it just seemed to me that when we got to talking to folks at the Historic Society, particularly like Diana, is that it was brought to light that there's so much of many of the people who've served on the city council over the years and famous people who've lived here that who've disappeared from our memory and our consciousness, and yet we love our city so much, and there's so little that we know about it. We tend to think that the city more or less began the modern era with Sammy Abbott, and anything that happened before that just couldn't really have been that important, except for perhaps Mr. Gilbert, who founded the city. But that's not the case. So if you wanted to find out, any information about anybody who served on the city council 20, 30, 50 years ago, where would you go? And one of the things we want to do is to make all of these things possible. And while it may not be possible to permanently memorialize the names of people, because time marches on, and monuments, unless they're the Lincoln Memorial or the Washington Monument, and even after that earthquake, you have to wonder about the durability of that. These things can't last forever, but if we built a digital archive, which is what this recognition commission would be, among other things, commissioned to do, then we really would have a permanent documentation of all of these important people, whether they're important to the city as a whole or to a neighborhood or to one of us personally. Could be a record of that honor could be kept permanently, that would be accessible at all times to the public. And as we go forward in the future, of course, we would have an easy way of honoring people that need to be honored in an appropriate way. So that's why the task force was formed, which we've talked about already, and it's issued its report, and that's how we got to this particular point in time. So I'm excited about the work. I think for the creation of the commission, it will be a great deal of responsibility. Certainly the first couple of years as they get the procedures thing set up. But after that, it should be something that basically will be delegating the city council to that body of people who will have a budget, the responsibility of accepting petitions for recognition and making decisions about the recognition, so that the city council does not have to get involved in it that much.
And if I can just follow up on one of your last points there about having a budget, I think the idea is that there may be a little bit of money needed. There's a little bit of seed money to get it going now, but the hope is that it would be more self-sustaining than not, so that any issues about maintenance or those kinds of things would have to be things that don't basically come onto the city budget lines. And just one other quick thing. I couldn't find the piece of paper. I got something that came through snail mail, and I think maybe the clerk has it, that somebody recently came to the city looking for something commemorating somebody they knew, and they couldn't find it, and they wrote us and asked if we knew where it was. And it was just another one of those instances where we have to kind of scratch our heads and go, I wonder what this is.
I found it.
You did?
I found it, yes.
Okay, good.
It was at Westmoreland and Carroll. It's actually in Tacoma Urban Park.
Huh.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So if we had, the central database to know where these things are, we can answer those questions.
About the centennial tree that was planted?
There's a little tombstone plaque that's set right in the ground. It's maybe this big. Yeah. I haven't never looked at the name on it.
Yeah. So the question came in, and everybody was like, wonder what that is. So, Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I understand that what we have before us is a ordinance establishing a committee or commission, and it talks about the structure of the commission and the various duties and responsibilities of the commission. And part of that is to inventory the commemoratives and memorials that already exist. And it talks about building a digital archive with oral histories and things like that. But I don't see in here what's going to happen with that digital archive. Is it just going to sit on the computer somewhere, or is it say in here that it's to be available to the public?
The idea is that it'll be available to the public. It'll be, I would assume, on the city website.
And yeah, that's my assumption too. But it seems that maybe there should be no mention of that in the ordinance.
If you look at the orange sheet, page 4, line 79.
The digital record shall be publicly accessible.
Okay. All right. I'm happy. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you. A couple of comments, and first, thank you to the mayor and Councilmember Schultz for your work on this. Let me go from back to front. My first comment, I got a little lost in terms of maintaining a digital record, maintaining the physical plaques and other infrastructure built as honors, and then giving out honors. But I think with regard to page 4F, create a program of categories and procedures, I think it's a good idea to keep the council out of the process of necessarily selecting those. But I do think there should be a council role in deciding why people would be selected and what types of awards might be issued. Otherwise, we don't really have any say in it whatsoever. So for me, I don't know, create a program of categories and procedures for a variety of permanent and one-time awards. I guess is that what's of by and recommend adoption of by the city council? Is that where that would?
Well, in the very first paragraph of the whole document, it said, in the very first whereas, it says the city of Home Park is privileged to have many individuals, organizations, and businesses, and I think that's in the whereas, but in the statement of purpose on page 2, beginning at line 35, line 37, program recommend to the City Council procedures and programs to honor and commemorate individuals, organizations, and businesses that have made significant contributions, and it enumerates just about almost any category you can think of, including the civic life, which includes people who haven't necessarily been an elected official or an appointed official, but sometimes they've become so important to the community, and they may not even live necessarily in the community. They may have moved away or been a person who's lived next door to Tacoma Park but has been heavily involved, things like that.
Well, I guess I don't have a specific wording to suggest, but for me, under F on page 4, create a program of categories, procedures for a variety of permanent and one-time honors, awards, and memorials. And if it said something like, and recommend adoption of, by the city council, once adopted, the committee or the commission shall implement,
I think the intent was that there would be mostly what you say, and that there would also be an option for occasionally for the council to recommend some award or recognition or commemoration in addition, but that there be the opportunity for individuals to request things, neighborhoods to request things, so that those procedures would all be set up and mostly keep the council out of it, but there would be the option for the council on certain occasions.
Okay. Well, just for me, if there's something in there about the commission then implementing, not necessarily exclusively, as you said, but them charged with implementing, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's fine.
And again, I said this last time we spoke about this, and I'll say it again, although I don't know if there's any support for it. For something like this, I would prefer to see it activated once every 2 years. To me, awards that happen every 2 years just have awards and commemorations and other things. I don't know, there's something a little bit more to them than something that happens annually. So that would be a preference. And the last change that I would suggest is, with due respect to the mayor, I would give the mayor one voting member, not three, because I have trouble seeing why we would do it 3 for this committee or this commission and not all of our committees and commissions. And I think about the charter and how the charter balances the powers of the council and the mayor, and I'm just not sure why we would do that here but not in other cases.
I kind of had the same question.
There you go. So if we did.
I thought it was because the mayor was serving the task force, and he just felt like he wanted to have all that
I have no problem.
power.
I think somebody likes the mayor.
So those are my 3 things. So thank you for your work on this.
I see no problem changing, and it could be we reduce the number of people on the commission.
From 9 to 7.
9 to 7. Just make it 1 each. And I don't have any particular issue with, are you thinking all categories of awards 2 years, or just maybe the potential for for the council? I don't know. I'm trying to figure out. A lot of it may be even less often than that.
Yeah. Maybe somewhere in there it could say, whereas the council thinks that, biennial or
The
awards
awards do not have to be annual.
Yeah.
I suspect that nominations will be coming forth sort of at random times after the initial few years. I mean, there's going to be a lot of catching up to do, research to complete the inventory. But after the first 2 or 3 years, the arts, this commission's certainly not necessarily going to have to be meeting on a monthly basis by any stretch. But as nominations and proposals come in for honoring somebody for some reason, they might say, well, gee, we don't really have a category for that. Maybe we need, like if we want to nominate, say every year the Tacoma Park Independence Day Parade ought to be named after, in honor of a particular person. Well, then maybe somebody say, well, we've never done that before, but maybe we should do that from now on. So this will allow for this commission to kind of be flexible with how it works.
Councilmember Smith and then Councilmember Stewart.
Just want to say, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Schultz, thank you very much for putting this presentation together for us. I think it's an excellent idea. Just 2 questions. One on number 82, it says devise a means to include in the digital archive oral or written stories. Do you guys foresee maybe like the Friends of the Library or Historic Tacoma proactively going out to seek these written stories, or how is that? Okay.
Historic Tacoma's president is nodding her head yes.
Okay, good. Excellent. Okay.
Why don't you go to the microphone? Diana, why don't you go to the microphone?
It would give more official status to those oral histories. It's to elevate everything so that everyone in the city knows.
Excellent. Great. And my second question, last question, what do you guys foresee the fees that are going to be for the services number 89? Or do you know?
The commission will have that discussion.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. So I think this looks terrific. Thank you, everyone, for the work on this. One thing I just wanted to mention is potentially working with students at the University of Maryland who do public history, because I think that could be a wonderful collaboration. I'm really happy to see and excited to see oral and written stories, but even other parts of this. And I know even Mr. Hutton at Tacoma Park Elementary School used to actually teach a class. I don't know if he still does, on Tacoma history, where he took the students walking through the neighborhood and talking about it. And I just think there's a lot of opportunity to really bring these members of our community alive. And so that's it.
Yeah, one of the things that we did a lot of brainstorming with this, is that I think it'd be great to try to see if we can't identify all of the really oldest people in the city of Tacoma Park and, round them up to some extent, to the extent that you can do that, and maybe bring them to a forum like this with a moderator and have them talk, and like we do with, or used to do with World War II veterans, things like that. Or at least, if we can't do that, to get somebody to meet with them and to get their stories while they're still able to do that, if it's in their home or whatever it needs to be. And if there's students who are skilled at that, it'd be great.
And another thing that came up in this context was the fact that a number of years ago, the city used to have a reception every year for volunteers who helped the city in a number of endeavors, commission and committee members, some of the people who volunteered doing clerical work in the police department, a lot of people like that, and we've kind of fallen away from that, and it's good to just take an opportunity to recognize people for all the work that they do in volunteering in the city. Yep. So, people generally happy with this draft, we can go forward and set this up. All right, good. Thank you. And the clerk will make those couple minor changes from this evening's discussion, and this will come back for vote, I think, next week. And that takes care of our business for this evening. We're adjourned.